Thanks, everybody. It's awesome to have you back here at day 2 of Justice Rising 9/11 2020. We are incredibly blessed today with speakers, which I'm going to introduce to you. And guess what? I just want to tell you that, I better tell you who I am first, right? Richard Gage, AIA, architect, member of the American Institute of Architects, and founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. And we are now with 3,300 architects and engineers demanding a new investigation into the destruction of all 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers on 9/11. And Justice Rising has been an incredible experience for us. The speakers that we've had yesterday, and this is now archived on our website, ae911truth.org, which you can just go to and watch live, or the upcoming archives, the previous archives. They'll all be there of this 3-day conference. Now, yesterday we had the blessing of Matt Campbell, who brought the story of his plight to get justice for his brother Jeff, who was murdered in the North Tower on September 11th on the 106th floor during the controlled demolition of that tower. We are raising funds for Matt in order to pursue a new inquest into his brother's death. And we talked about that last week. We're still raising funds. We're in a fund drive to raise $100,000. And guess what? We're more than 3/4 of the way there. This is an incredible opportunity to get our evidence into the court system. So I want to make sure that all of you, everybody watching, takes advantage of the opportunity to participate in this pooled effort. This is a lot of money. This is the best barrister in London, as we believe. He's a coroner himself, requesting a new inquest into the death. He's successfully defeated the government in lawsuits. He's on our side. This is a tailor-made opportunity to get the World Trade Center 7 and building, particularly the Twin Towers evidence, into a court of law. So donate now at ae911truth.org to this historic cause. After that, we saw that Ted Walter, the inspiring author of 100-page Request for Correction to NIST, who was assisted greatly by Tony Zambodi and Mick Harrison of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. We looked into the vulnerability of NIST and our pursuit of them right into the legal system if we have to, and we probably will. We then turned it over to the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, who had an incredible announcement of the submission of a petition for a grand jury investigation of the anthrax attacks on 9/11, which are part of the 9/11 conspiracy, not the official conspiracy, but as the facts and the evidence, the testimony shows, a grand conspiracy involving officials at very high levels in our government. All of that was yesterday in Justice Rising. Today, we are honored to bring you some very exciting news about the latest film that we are making at AE911 Truth called 7. And I have some very special guests I want to introduce to you in a minute. But first, I want to tell you, in the next hour, we go on to the global failure. Roland of our Project Due Diligence and myself will be giving you the evidence for Building 7 and the Twin Towers explosive controlled demolition. And then, a couple hours from now, we go right into David Ray Griffin, Niels Harrit, Stephen Jones, reflections from 3 pioneers in the 9/11 truth movement. Absolutely historic. We haven't heard from these gentlemen in years. They have other pursuits in their life, and we're just honored to have them back. So don't miss this. Stay tuned. Don't miss a single thing. But be sure to donate to the effort to get this new inquest. So I'm going to remind you several times, but don't wait till the very end, because we want to build up to and achieve that $100,000 effort to help Matt Campbell's inquest by the end of this broadcast. our online conference. So, and we go on to tomorrow. So I'll tell you later tonight what we're up to tomorrow, Sunday, Big Picture Sunday. Today, Science Saturday. Yesterday, Justice Friday. All of it's online. In league with what we're about, we want you to be aware of some incredible materials that we have. And I meant to tell you about this one yesterday, Beyond Misinformation. What science says about the destruction of World Trade Center 1, 2, and 7. This is a 50-page booklet created by our own Ted Walter with what in the back of it? 9/11 explosive evidence. Experts speak out. The DVD. It's yours for free. Just email me at info@ae911truth.org, and I will send it to you. But make sure you put your address in there and that it's for Beyond Misinformation, because I have a lot of other stuff that I'm going to be giving away to you today. So tell me what it is you want, and if you're among the first two, we will send it to you. So a lot of exciting things here happening. I want to introduce to you 3 guests, and we're very excited to have with us today. First, Dylan Avery, an acclaimed filmmaker with numerous documentaries, short films, music videos to his credit. His film on police brutality, Black and Blue, won the best documentary at the Catalina Film Festival. He also made Magic Molecule, a documentary on CBD. He edited and co-produced The Professional, a Stevie Blatt story, a documentary that premiered at Slam Dance in 2019. And last but not least, Dylan's the creator of the most viewed online 9/11 documentary ever, Loose Change 9/11. How many of you have heard about it and have had your mind turned around or your life turned upside down, depending on what happens? That was incredible. And we'll be talking about that. Kelly David is here with us also. I'll bring them all up in a moment. She has a bachelor's of science degree from New York Institute of Technology in 2002. She majored in behavioral science and minored in criminal justice. Kelly helped organize the day-to-day operations of several businesses in New York, where she grew up and volunteered in the 9/11 Truth movement. She then joined Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. Her remarkable management skills later in 2014 as Chief Operating Officer. We got her promoted, and she's doing a fantastic job. The following year, she was named to the board of directors here at AE 9/11 Truth. She's absolutely indispensable to me personally, to us as an organization. Finally, I want you to meet the star of the film that we're going to be talking about today, the author of the 4-year finite element analysis computer modeling at the University of Alaska. Professor Leroy Hulsey, PhD, PE, SE, structural engineer. He was the chair of the Civil and Engineering Department at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks until his retirement in May. During his 50-year career, Dr. Hulsey taught at the University of Missouri in Rolla, North Carolina State University, and at UAF. He served in the American Society of Civil Engineers, the American Council of Engineering Companies. In 2020, with funding from us, he did complete that 4-year computer modeling study, which is changing the landscape in the academic and institutional careers and fields in engineering. And we're getting this out. We've sent 75,000 postcards to engineers all across the country. We're sending 400 copies of this 135-page report, which, by the way, you can download at our website. Don't let me forget to tell you that. It's free. That PDF, it's right on our website. You can find it. Let me bring up our esteemed guests at this time. First, Dylan Avery. And hello, Dylan.
Hello, Richard.
Hey. And also Kelly David, our Chief Operating Officer, and Professor Leroy Hulsey. Gentlemen and ladies, how are you all?
Great.
I'm good.
Great.
You look good.
Thanks.
All right. Now, I'm going to do this, guys. I'm going to put Professor Hulsey on hold just for a moment. And we're going to focus. In fact, Dylan, do you mind if I put you on hold for just a moment too?
I don't mind.
Kelly and I've got something very special. And Dylan Avery has been in the 9/11 Truth Movement longer than I think about anybody. And before we get started with the movie 7, Kelly and I wanted to take a special moment to recognize somebody whose work has enacted a sea change of awakening to the 9/11 truth. He and his team created the original film series, which has been seen tens of millions of times, waking the very dead in the process. Yes, we're talking about Loose Change 9/11. And yes, we're talking about an original 18-year-old hero in the 9/11 Truth Movement 19 years ago. He was a teenager when he asked himself this, when he tasked himself with this monumental achievement. What were you doing as a teenager? Our viewers, if you were like me, you weren't creating a film that changed the world. Take a look at some of this vintage footage of this brave man.
Let's go from the beginning then, and just to ask you first of all,
Start that one again for you.
why did you start to think that there was more to 9/11 than met the eye?
I just stumbled into it. It's really what it came down to. I started researching 9/11. I started looking into the essence. I started looking into what happened with the Twin Towers. And there's a domino effect from there. Phil of Let's Roll 911.org, he started advertising it and started, getting the word out. I put up a couple trailers, I was hitting up the forums, my presence was out there, but people were just kind of like, yeah, well, I'll check it out. And I put up a couple things here and there. So, basically, it was word of mouth.
Loose Change is a video produced on a laptop, and yet it's ranked among the most watched independent videos since it was put online last year.
And you suggested we show a part of a clip of the documentary Loose Change by Dylan Avery. And it was a film that has been watched by 10 million viewers because you could see it through the internet.
What they say, it's the things that, make you look at what you thought you saw in a different light.
As we take on the issue of what happened on September 11, 2001. Our guests are Dylan Avery, writer and director of Loose Change.
At 5:20 p.m. on September 11th, World Trade Center Building 7, it was a 47-story steel frame skyscraper, 300 feet to the north of the North Tower. At 5:20 p.m., this building collapses in under 7 seconds.
Kelly, let's talk about this just a little bit. You and me. Hold on one second. I gotta think about this. Dylan, on behalf of all of us in the 9/11 Truth Movement, from the bottom of our hearts, we thank you collectively for lifting the veil from our minds. Folks at home, if you have a loose change story that you'd like to share with Dylan, somebody who just got literally woken up or dragged through the mud with it, as some of us had to experience our own internal world view turned upside down, I invite you to email it to Dylan, to us, through us, info@ae911truth.org. We'll send it on to him. Be sure to express your appreciation. Dylan, let me bring you on for a moment. Hold on one second. Let's bring in Dylan. And folks, a huge round of applause for Dylan. Gosh,
Stop.
That was incredible. I've got a question for you, though. Here we go. What was it that really inspired you to create this extraordinary film series and put in all that work as a teenager? Please tell us the story of how this happened.
Kind of slowly and gradually. I mean, it was one of those things where, it's not like on September 12th I was working on it. It was definitely a slow discovery process of looking into the slow disbursement of information that was starting to come out in 2002, 2003. The same slow disbursement of video footage. Things that we weren't really able to see that day on the TV, or things that were aired once and weren't really shown again. Yeah, it was just kind of a slow discovery process, and it all started with the military's response, or lack thereof, to the attacks themselves, and it just kind of like spiderwebbed out from there.
Kelly, you surely must have a question for Dylan here.
A question? No, I don't really have a question. No, though I would like to make some comments, because I do believe that Loose Change has had an enormous effect in helping to create the 9/11 truth movement. When I ask most people what it was about the 9/11 evidence that woke them up, more than anything else, I always hear, "Oh, I watched Loose Change," or "Someone recommended that I watch Loose Change." And I feel like most of us wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for that powerful film that a young aspiring filmmaker made on his laptop as a kid, basically. And to quote Vanity Fair, I think they put it best when they called it the first internet blockbuster, because it was just that. And as the years have passed, he's become an acclaimed filmmaker. You'd mentioned the films that he has done, so he's just branched out, gotten a lot better since then. But more than anything else, I have to say, from my experience, it's been a pleasure and an honor to have worked with him. I found him to be such a driven, hard worker whose abilities that I deeply admire. On set, he's completely focused from start to finish, always on top of every aspect, making sure that each piece goes off without a hitch. But to me, Dylan is just a wonderful human being with a huge heart. And over the years, I've been lucky enough to have the privilege of calling him a very dear friend, a friend who I can always count on to brighten my hectic day, making me smile just by shooting me over a text or something like that. So, Dylan, we all owe you a great thanks. And for me personally, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. It was so sweet.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Dylan. I'm going to turn it back to you guys. Let's talk about this new film, 7.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess that's on me. Yeah, what was it? I think October of last year, Kelly, you guys had reached out and said, we're wrapping up this study and we want to have an accompanying documentary for it, something people can watch to kind of distill down the findings. And, for me, I hadn't made a 9/11 film in a decade, and I didn't really have any interest in doing it, just because I felt like I had already done everything that I could have possibly done, and maybe a little bit more. So the nice thing about this project is it was a new approach to, I don't want to say old material, but it was a new way of looking at the subject and looking at a very specific aspect of 9/11 instead of trying to distill the whole big picture down to one single film. So to me, that was the most exciting part. I got to hire my favorite DP, a director of photography, for anyone who doesn't know what that means. I got to hire a director of photography. I got to hire a sound man, 2 people that I know from Los Angeles that are just amazing at what they do. And it was just a nice opportunity to revisit the subject and to do it through a different lens, both literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
How about you, Kelly? How was your time on the set?
I thought it was great. Everything about it was amazing. I think, on top of all the hard work that we did in organizing everything to make sure that this film was different than your average 9/11 documentary, and hiring the director of photography, I think that went a long way into changing it from what you would normally see in a 9/11 documentary to something more you would see, more cinematic, something you would see on Netflix. And I think, on the set, traveling to Alaska, getting to work with Leroy directly, getting to know him, getting to see him interact with his students. It was a wonderful experience. And, honestly, we had a lot of fun doing it. I think it was great.
I would agree.
Yeah. So we have some clips to show. We have a new trailer that we haven't released yet. I don't know who's going to cue those up. I'm guessing.
I think that's on Richard.
I think that's on Richard.
Yeah.
So I think we should show the trailer first, and then we have 2 clips on top of that.
We should show the trailer, and then maybe we should bring in Leroy and have Leroy talk a bit. But
Yeah.
you know, I'm not running the show here. That's just my suggestion.
And I'm fine with that.
All right. Well, then let's get to it. I'm going to show all the clips if that's okay with you guys, and then we'll bring on Leroy because that's the order of events as I have them in my show here. So here's the trailer for the new movie. And did you say when it comes out, Dylan? I had a distraction there.
No, I mean we're waiting to get a final release date from 1091, but that's really the big excitement, the big announcement, one of several to make today, is that we've partnered with 1091 Media for this project, so it's going to get some legitimate distribution through traditional channels. So that's nice.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Did you talk about the traditional channels before I forget to ask you that too?
No, I mean there's no specifics yet, but I mean I imagine it'll pop up on iTunes and Google Play, and they did mention streaming platforms. I don't know if that's going to include Netflix just because it's Netflix, but we did shoot it in 4K, so we do have that going for us.
Yeah, fantastic. All right, here we go.
Well, it's been a point of controversy now for more than a decade. A researcher now from the University of Alaska Fairbanks is weighing in. Well, it's been a point of controversy now for more than a decade. A researcher now from the University of Alaska Fairbanks is weighing in.
My name is Leroy Hulsey. That's my middle name, and I'm a structural engineering professor here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks.
He led a 4-year study which reevaluates whether Building 7's collapse could have been caused by fire.
Building 7 of the World Trade Center came down. It was never hit by an airplane.
It fell because thermal expansion caused a fire-induced progressive collapse.
And we'd never experienced, prior to that day, a steel frame building collapsing due to fire. It just didn't happen.
Was there a possibility it could lead up to failure through these fundamentals that NIST looked at and said they could, I looked at and said they could?
The way they modeled it was somewhat pushing the limit, putting it mildly.
NIST said it was a fire problem, but yet I did not see any change to our codes.
I mean, I think the work that we're doing is ultimately going to make the difference. I have that confidence because I know the truth always comes out.
There's a problem with the collapse of Building 7. There's a problem with 9/11.
And let's go right into the next clip here. Here we go. And sorry, guys, if you're experiencing
This
some
stated that a primary
pixelization.
load-bearing girder attached to column 79 became dislodged from its column connections, causing a series of failures through columns 80 and 81, bringing the entire building down. According to NIST, even without the initial structural damage caused by debris impact from the collapse of WTC-1, WTC-7 would have collapsed from fires having the same characteristics as those experienced on September 11th, 2001. Conspicuously absent from this report. is the corroded piece of steel from Building 7, despite FEMA having identified it as a key piece of evidence. The extreme temperatures responsible for the corrosive attack on the steel were magnitudes higher than the maximum temperatures estimated by NIST to have occurred inside Building 7. The New York Times referred to that piece of steel as perhaps the deepest mystery uncovered in the investigation.
There's a reference often made to a piece of steel from Building 7, but there was no evidence that any of the residue in that piece of steel, had any relationship to an undue fire event in the building or any other kind of incendiary device in the building.
They seem to focus on a solution right from the very beginning and ignore all evidence that would have led them in any other direction. So that's bass backwards, as they say.
My concern about the NIST reports is they ignored evidence, and it wasn't because they didn't know about it.
And I see that sometimes in engineering, in the business, where your boss would tell you, focus on this. The way they modeled it was somewhat pushing the limit, putting it mildly. They got to a point where they did a beautiful animation of the building, which looks like, and I keep repeating the same thing, it looks like it's crumpling like a beer can, as opposed to basically falling straight into its footprint.
I never worked for NIST, but I was a resident engineer for the Army Corps of Engineers for a few years. I have a very strong feeling about the responsibilities of what engineers have in general, in particular, engineers that work for the government. They have a higher responsibility in some ways, or they should feel that way. I did.
There was just this silence in the academic world about this subject. So we began looking around for someone that would be willing to undertake such a study. And fortunately, through a series of personal acquaintances, we ran across Professor Hulsey up at the University of Alaska at Fairbanks.
He's a straight arrow type of person. He wants to look at things from a very rational, impartial perspective, blocking all the noise out, which is really what is needed in this case.
Oh, yeah, there we go. So, sometimes I'm on mute and sometimes I'm not. I'm sorry we butchered your beautiful new film there, Dylan. But you have any comments on that clip? And I think that'll be the last one that we show, given the issues that we're having graphically there. Any quick comments before you bring Leroy in?
Yeah, that was a scene that, is kind of half Ed Asner, kind of giving a little bit of a Act 1 history lesson on Building 7, and then, it's followed up by the comments by Roland, Scott, and Kamal, who are the other 3 engineers featured in it. So, it's just some introductory stuff, warming up the audience that may not be aware of everything about Building 7. So I say we bring in Leroy.
Well, there he is. Leroy, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Great. You are the star of this show. Can we turn it over to you and tell us what was it like to create a study of the collapse of Building 7 and challenge the preeminent authority on the collapse of Building 7, in this case, NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, who was tasked by Congress to explain this collapse to the American people. And here you come along finally. How did you get into this? And what was your experience like over the last 4 years and then making the film? I want to give you the floor here.
Well, I guess I was approached by your people, a gentleman, John Thay, who's in Anchorage, and he contacted me. I turned it down with the idea that, I just wasn't sure that I wanted to do that. He then approached me again. I turned it down. And then on the third time, I said, okay, I think I need to do this. So with that being said, I put together several criteria. One of those is that it would be based purely on science. It would not involve any of the hearsays or any of the other things that would be out there. This was a science study, basically. That's simple. I recruited 2 PhD students to do this with me, and we set up a quality control method by which we could examine the values and the study on a daily basis, so that we could be sure that what we were doing we all could agree to, or we would question the work that was being done on a daily basis to make sure that what we were putting out there was going to be scientifically sound. So that being said, I put together the requirement of having two finite element programs. One is SAP 2000, which is well known, and the other is Abacus, which is basically a research tool, and it's very, very powerful. And then we used a couple other programs to help us along the way. And then through that process, we obtained the erection drawings. It got a lot of additional information technically that was available through that NIST had available, and we were able to get a lot of that. Unfortunately, as you all may know, that the debris, which would have been the most important part of this whole study if we could have gotten it, was sent out very quickly. Very unusual. Typically, if you're going to do a forensic study, you're going to have that information available, and you can begin to sort through and evaluate the debris and evaluate the conditions that may have produced that debris. We didn't have that. So we had to return to the structure itself, examine the potential energy being imposed by the fires that were argued to be the cause of the failure. And then through that process, we went ahead and began to look at the response of the structure. And so we did it individually right from the beginning without regards to what NIST did. Then later, we pursued looking at the NIST study and began to look at whether we could agree with what had gone on there, and their results, or if we were unable to verify what was found. And so through that process, this is where we went. And so unfortunately, it took about 4 years to get it done. The last year, almost exclusively, was spent trying to determine the mechanisms that actually contributed or resulted in what you see in the videos of how that structure came down. And we were able to simulate that fairly well. And please understand, we did not do a video game with this. We actually ran it on the computer to examine whether the conditions that we were getting simulated what the actual structure experienced during that failure day.
Thank you, Leroy. I know that we must have some questions for you. And while I'm looking for those from our good friend, we want to ask you, well, Dylan and Kelly, I mean, what was it like working with Leroy on the set? Give us the behind the scenes feel of this operation. This is going to be a sea change too, because we did this film to get the attention not only of the public but the engineers, who, to grab them. So, what was it like working with Leroy, Kelly, Dylan?
Well, Kelly and I can probably both speak to this, but I had filmed Leroy speaking at Berkeley at the faculty club in September of 2019. But apart from filming his speech in some very brief interactions with him, I didn't really get to know him per se. But after spending some time with him in Fairbanks and just watching him walk around the campus and interact with students, and just kind of the general respect that I saw for him around the campus, it was nice. Like I felt like when I filmed his presentation, I kind of got to know Professor Leroy Hulsey, but then after my time in Fairbanks with him, I felt like I had met just Hulsey. So,
yeah, that's what his students call him. And that was one of the things that really impressed me. His students just adore him. And he takes time away from his normal schedule to go in and check on them when they're in, just a regular conference room working on their final project. Because it was around finals when we were up there. And he just goes in to talk to them and give them advice, and they love him. They all call him Hulsey. That's his name. He's not the professor. He's almost like a friend. And just from my own experience dealing with professors, when you get a professor that's like that, and they're able to keep your attention, grab your attention, build a good relationship with you, that's when you learn the most. And I just think in being there, working with him, I got to know him a lot better and realized that he was even a, great, better person than I thought he was before. But B, to see what an amazing professor he actually is. So I was really impressed with that. And yeah, it was, as I mentioned earlier, it was great. It was fun, and to be behind the scenes and get to see all of that and get to know Leroy better.
Okay, and Leroy, on a technical note, one of our viewers says NIST won't release their computer input data for Building 7. Did that cause any issues with your computer modeling efforts?
No, not really. I mean, we had their results and their conclusions. We modeled and tried to simulate their findings. We had enough information to be able to make a determination for the most part of what they were doing, and so I wasn't too concerned about that. It was clear that there was there were errors in their modeling, unfortunately, and that led them to the conclusions they had. And so, if you recall my first presentation, I think it was may have been on the 15th anniversary. I don't remember, but that's when I pointed out that the building actually moved in the opposite direction thermally to what they had said. And so that was a big observation right away, that there was things that were different that the building had to go through to actually do what it needed to do during that condition, based upon the limited amount of fires that was in the building. So
okay, and did you have to convince the university at all? Was there any trouble working with the university? Any harsh feedback? Any effort to control the outcome of this project?
Let me just say this: that I was very, very, very pleased with our university. They stepped out. They wanted to make sure that the science was good, and they, patted me on the back for what I was doing. Keep in mind that the two presentations at the university was actually introduced by our vice president of research. Vice president or vice chancellor, I can't remember which, but anyway, he was just really complimentary on our work, and I'm pleased to say that it was a great experience to be able to do that without feeling any pressure. One of our university professors in the journalism department actually early on did some filming there as well as part of this study to show that how we were actually putting together the quality control mechanism for doing the work that we were doing. So,
okay, thanks. And for Dylan, did working on Loose Change influence the kind of films that you chose to work on later?
No, not really. I wish I had a more exciting answer for you, but I don't know. Like I'm always rubbed the wrong way by injustices of one form and another. And it's funny because I started making my police brutality documentary in February of 2014, which is 6 months before the uprising in Ferguson. So I definitely had my finger on the pulse with that one. And then, of course, I was kind of unfortunately beat to the punch by a whole bunch of other productions that got off the ground shortly after Ferguson and then wrapped up shortly thereafter. But I don't know. I try to make films that speak to societal ills in one way or another. And even with the narrative feature that I just finished directing, like it's, there's a lot of themes in there about, things that people can relate to is all I will say. But I don't know. I guess I try to somewhat make the world a better place through my movies. Some people might disagree with that, but that's what I find to be motivating.
Cool. How are we able, this viewer says, in the near future to get this film 7 to be presented in other countries, like the most happy and least corrupted country in the world, Finland, and then Europe in general?
Oh, I thought they were going to say Costa Rica. Well, I mean, 1091 is an international distribution company, so I would imagine that internationals actually might be more interesting. I can't think of the word. Platform isn't the word, but territory. Yeah, I think international territories might be good for this project. And then one of the other reasons that was it was beneficial that 1091 approached us about the project, because I mean, my private screener uploads of the film are getting removed by YouTube, even though they're not public and there's no way for anyone to see them except for myself and the people I send it to. My private uploads of 7 for you guys to watch are getting removed by YouTube. So that's fun. So thankfully we have it in the hands of a legitimate distribution company that can get it out there, can get it past some of the censorship that's happening. Yeah, so we'll see. But yeah, we're handing the masters off to them. They've got the artwork. They've got a lot of the things that they need to start marketing it. We're supposed to get our sales sheet to them soon. So once they start gauging the interest and seeing where they can get it out to, kind of go from there. But I imagine it'll come out shortly after the election, just because that's basically the only thing that's going to be on people's mind. I mean, it's already the 12th, and I feel like people are forgetting about 9/11. So my hope is that after the election, one way or another, people will be ready to focus on something that isn't the election. So we'll see.
And it'll give them enough time to market it. And that was another, good thing about teaming up with 1091. They did mention international platforms that are available. So, that opportunity is definitely there.
Awesome. Well, Dylan, this viewer wants to know, how hard was it to make 7? Did making a documentary about building 7 make it any harder to get cooperation that you always need to make a movie?
There wasn't really a lot of cooperation needed, just because, we already had the interviews lined up, like all the participants were willing. There was one eyewitness that we were really banking on interviewing, that we were supposed to interview in February, and then he kind of stopped responding to us, which is weird because he was very enthusiastic and had actually originally approached AE 9/11 Truth about coming out in the first place. This is a person that's on the public record on the day of 9/11 discussing what he witnessed, and I was going back and forth with him. I talked to them on the phone a couple times, and then when it came down to scheduling the interview, he just stopped responding. So that was a bit of a challenge, only because we had this specific ending in mind for the documentary and had to go in a different direction. But that's documentary filmmaking for you. You always have to adapt and change according to what it is you actually capture. Yeah, I don't know. It was a double-edged sword, because for one, it was kind of refreshing to work on the subject material again, but also, B, having already made 4 films about the subject, it was tricky sometimes to find the right approach for certain scenes and try to find a way to keep it interesting and exciting for myself, so I don't find myself getting burnt out the way I did a decade ago.
Right. And here's a question maybe all of us should tackle. Okay, we spent 4 years and a whole lot of supporters' dollars. I mean, a whole lot, more than I ever thought we could raise. This was beyond my wildest expectations. We really had some donors, and I mean thousands of donors, come through to support this effort. What are we going to do with it? Well, I mentioned earlier, I think couple of things I was aware of, not aware of, but we had more supporters support the effort to get this out. One donor in particular said, I want this going to every major engineering association and major engineering firm in the country. So Larry in our office printed 400 of these and is sending them out. He's halfway through that project right now. And we sent 75,000 postcards. to as many engineers as we could get email addresses for.
Addresses.
What did I say?
Email.
Email.
Emailed them.
Mailing addresses. Kelly, I told you she's on top of everything. Kelly, are you aware of any other efforts? Because I have some in my mind, like Congress, which we've gotten them to, many members of Congress. What other efforts are we making that you're aware of?
I mean,
and
those are pretty much the things right now. And now we're just trying to work on, what we can do. What's the next step? We've tossed around a couple of different ideas on how to get this out there, how to grab engineers' attention, like possibly YouTube ads, all of these things were discussed. But there isn't anything that we have cemented down now at this moment. But this is not something that we're just going to let go. It's not like we did this study, we mailed out a bunch of postcards, we're making a movie, and that's that. No, I mean, just the request for correction alone is just one step in the right direction for this. So, it was a 4-year study, and it cost a lot of money. It was a lot of sacrifices for all of us. And we thank all of our supporters for helping us out here, because as Richard said, he didn't even believe it would be possible to raise that amount of money, but we were able to do it and pull it off. So this won't be the end. We definitely will do everything that we can possibly do in order to get as many engineers to read this as possible. The key is, because it is such a long draft, report itself, and even the draft report was long. The report itself is long, and there's a lot of material. So you got to try to grab their attention. Something short, and then after we pique their interest, then they can go look deeper into it. And so, we're coming up with a bunch of different things. And as I said before, this is not it. It's not over. So, time will tell. Soon.
And our Director of Strategy and Development, Ted Walter. I want to make sure everybody can hear me. Yeah, good. He reminded us that, this whole film is about the study. This is the major effort, actually, that we have to get it out there. We want millions of people to see it, and we're going to send the film itself to every member of Congress, to every large engineering firm and association. And not to mention the request for correction, which we covered in detail yesterday, 100-page request, which focuses on the results of this study, which completely pulls the rug out from underneath NIST's initiation of collapse theory that this building came down due to normal office fires. Professor Hulsey, did this building come down due to normal office fires?
No.
And as they so famously asked you at our Justice in Focus conference, the attorneys whom you were testifying before, if you were to give a letter grade to NIST on their final report of the World Trade Center 7 collapse, what grade would you give them? You give students grades all the time. What would be NIST's grade for this project of theirs?
Well, it wouldn't be good. Probably a D or an F.
And why?
Well, they had the wrong conclusions. They had the wrong, the model wasn't accurate. They ignored things that were actually used during construction that they said were not. I mean, there was a number of factors that were not exactly what was supposed to be there. And so that led to conclusions that were inaccurate.
Okay, then. One viewer says to you, Professor Hulsey, wants to know, did you model actual controlled demolitions to compare it to Building 7's collapse?
I did not. What I did is I looked at the conditions that were necessary to bring it down, to look to what we began to see in terms of velocities. We had a dynamic analysis that we were looking at, and looking at taking out the structural pieces that would give it the conditions that you actually see. And so through that process, we were able to almost duplicate the velocity that was going down, and the parts of the structure that had to go down. That took us over almost a year to get that to happen, to show that the other things that were being said could not actually have occurred.
Okay, so there's one other question here. Professor, did you simulate what the fall of World Trade Center 7 would have looked like under the failure that NIST insists happened, i.e. the slipping off of one end of a beam under the heat of a fire?
We did. The building would have not come straight down. Didn't happen.
Is there any credit you can give NIST at all?
Well, I'm not sure how that all transpired. NIST is a really typically an outstanding facility. They provide very good help for all the engineers. For this study, it had to be through. I just don't know how that could have occurred to end up with the inaccuracies in the study.
Okay, well, this viewer's driving it home here. I'm sorry, but he says, so do you think that column failures were due to something else besides fire? What might that be?
Well, I've been very careful not to put anything out there. But for sure, those columns had to come out in the manner in which I said they were for this building to come down, and that would have been failure over 8 stories, and the interior columns coming down first starting with the penthouse, and then the interior columns, and then following that the exterior columns, and that was over an 8-story, and probably somewhere anywhere below the 16th floor, or would have caused that kind of thing. The failures at the penthouse actually were caused near the top of the building, not within the lower part of the building where there were fires, where that all started.
What relevance would that have?
Couldn't have been a fire. Couldn't have been a fire.
Ah.
Didn't happen.
Okay. Kelly, you've been with AE 9/11 Truth for how many years now?
7.
What do you think brought those buildings down?
Personally, I just don't see how it could be anything other than a controlled demolition, in my opinion.
Well, Kelly and Larry Landon in our office helped us to make something about all 3 of these towers, which is a series of cards. And if somebody has taken the time to look at this evidence, like we're going to be providing Roland Angle and myself in the next segment, actually, these cards are very handy. If guys at home, if you've looked at the evidence and you're convinced that it was a controlled demolition, then I am personally asking you to do something about it. And I'm going to give you some options. Hand these out at a table on your street, and the brochures. These are the 9/11 Truth Good for America brochures with all the evidence and an insert in there and why America needs the 9/11 Truth so much, especially at this time. We're going to give 2 100 packs away. So just email me at info@ae911truth.org. Put your address and put brochure, and I'll send you those. Write card. We're going to give 2 50 packs of each of these cards to you right now. We will mail it as soon as we get your address at info@ae911truth. Just put cards. So, and these things are available in our store if you're not the lucky winner of the first 2. What, I sound like I'm on TV or something. Anyway, we've got more exciting things that are, all these are in the store, but we want to give them away. Why? Because we're encouraging you to spend your money not on products right now, but to support the effort of Matt Campbell, because the evidence that Leroy Hulsey has put together in this 4-year study is going straight into the UK court system within a month. And we are going to be turning things upside down there, because the Attorney General has no choice, really, given all the veracity of this evidence. It's irrefutable and overwhelming, to appoint a new inquest into Jeff Campbell's death, his murder in the North Tower. So that's what I wanted to tell you guys. And I have another question for you, Leroy. So do you think, no, wait, we got that one. This is a former project engineer, and he's wondering if there are any dynamic correlation values that can be used to compare the veracity of your model and simulation versus the NIST model and simulation.
There probably could be. I don't fully know if I have the answer to that question at this moment. I'd have to think about it. In order to get that correlation, we would have to see the model results of their system, of their finite element model. Then we could correlate for sure. So.
Okay, well, here's another one for you. It doesn't end. We've just got all kinds of goodies for you. How do you reconcile these 3 events? 1, the seismic activity occurring at Building 7 10 seconds prior to its overall collapse. 2, the collapse of the penthouse a few seconds prior to the overall collapse. And 3, the overall collapse itself. For the penthouse to collapse, wouldn't that be evidence of major internal destruction, which had yet to cause deformations in the exterior of the building?
Okay, so to the answer to the question about seismic, we looked in that and did not see any evidence that seismic was a problem for the bridge or building. In terms of the penthouse, we looked at that significant amount of time and explored what it would take for that penthouse to come down the way it did. And basically, we determined that that failure was at a high level. And we examined more than one level to see if that was truly occurring, which means that those columns failed at that level significantly at that point. And then that, of course, was followed up by all the interior columns at over an 8-story area that were severed, and that led to 1.3 seconds later the exterior columns having the same experience. So basically, that's the way it worked to get what you saw out there.
Yeah, thank you all. This has been an enlightening discussion for me. Anybody have any final thoughts before we end the segment?
No,
I got nothing.
You guys did awesome. Go ahead.
Let me just say one thing. As a researcher, I appreciate the opportunity to have been given the funding to be able to support 2 PhD students, and they did graduate and doing well. And I thank you all for giving us, the university, that opportunity.
Thank you, Leroy.
Thank you, Leroy, so much. And thank you, Kelly, and thank you, Dylan. And we'll catch up with all you guys real soon.
Thank you.
And there they go. All right. We have more to come. The actual evidence. In fact, global failure. Evidence engineers can no longer ignore. Roland Angle is with us, and together he and I are going to try to give you some of the evidence. Roland will be focusing on the actual study itself and the evidence at Building 7. I'm going to tell you about Roland Angle here. He's a civil engineer, but he did more structural engineering than anything else. Graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, with a BS in civil engineering. He served in the U.S. Army Special Forces, where he was trained in the use of explosives and became a licensed civil engineer in California. His 50 years of engineering experience has included designing and testing of blast-hardened missile launch facilities and designing U.S. naval explosive containers, harbor terminal facilities, earth foundation systems, hydraulic systems. In addition, Roland has owned 3 construction companies and has taught engineering subjects to high school students. Roland, it gives me great pleasure to bring you into the stream, and there you are. Ha! How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Richard. How are you?
Great. Look right at me. I'm up here. There we are. There's Roland Angle. Roland, what are you going to share with us today?
I've got a PowerPoint presentation that goes into the actual details of why the NIST report is inadequate to explain the collapse of the building, and compares it to the results that the UAF study came up with.
Beautiful. I'm going to let you take it right away, Roland. And here we go. Fire away. And you have a slideshow for us too, don't you?
I do.
Go ahead and share your screen. And there it is. And take it away, Roland.
All right, here we are looking at Building 7 on the day of 9/11. This photo was taken sometime between the time that the towers collapsed and the building itself came down. This building collapsed 5:20 in the afternoon. And I want to point out a few things about the building while we've got a good view of it here. First of all, this photo is taken from the north, and the towers collapsed behind it to the south. You can see the debris and the dust in the air. And I also want to point out that there were other tall buildings to the east and to the north and to the west of this building. And if the building had come down in anything but straight down fashion, it would have damaged and probably destroyed one or more of those buildings. So the fact that it came down straight down was a very convenient fact for whoever planned this event, because I believe it was a planned event, and the evidence shows that. I also want to point out that let's take a close look at these structures on the roof of the building. This is the east penthouse, and then you have a screen wall that goes over to the west penthouse, and these structures housed climate control equipment, and that equipment is very heavy. It's typical. You see the same thing on other buildings nearby. Typical design procedure. It also is very heavy equipment, and the east penthouse in particular was supported by 3 columns underneath it, columns 79, 80, and 81. And the weight of this structure loaded those columns to the greatest degree that any column was loaded in the whole building. So that's an important factor that we'll come back to later when we talk about how the building was behaving. Keep in mind that we've got a trapezoidal building here. The long side is on the north, and we've got, at this point, whenever this picture was taken sometime in the early afternoon, we don't see any fires in the building whatsoever, at least on the north side. Now we're going to talk about what NIST said about why the building collapsed. And here we have Shyam Sunder, who was in charge of the NIST investigation, and his synopsis of why the building failed.
What we found was that uncontrolled building fires caused an extraordinary event.
The collapse of World Trade Center 7 was primarily due to fire.
So, the NIST analysis said that the fires that occurred in the building were the cause of it coming down. And that was an extraordinary event, as he admits right there. That had never happened before, it never happened since. So we need to understand why that building failed due to fires, because theoretically, every tall building, steel framed in the world now is endangering the people inside the building if it experiences office fires. The Hulsey report, which you've just been going over, was released in March of this year. And Professor Hulsey and his students, his graduate students at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, submitted this report to us in March of this year. And we are now making it public because it differs in its conclusions radically from the report that NIST issued. The problem that we are addressed with is the fact that their report said failure was due to normal office fires. So we need to ensure the public safety by understanding the failure mechanism. And when we looked at the NIST reports, we found a number of problems with that report that encouraged us to conduct our own report. That's why we hired the University of Alaska. And we are going to now go through what the NIST report says and what the UAF report says and offer some comments. The objective of the UAF study was to examine the structural response to the fire loads, rule out scenarios that could not cause its collapse, and identify the type of failures in their locations that could have caused the structure to collapse as it was observed. It used the same material properties that were used in the construction of the building, and there was also, of course, the same construction material properties that the NIST report used. It had three approaches in its methodology. First of all, simulate the local structural responses to the fire loading on floors 13 and below where the fires were reported. Examine the collapse initiation hypothesis that NIST developed, as well as any hypothesis advanced by private engineering firms. There were two who did studies commissioned as part of litigation that was related to the collapse, and simulate several scenarios within that system to determine what types of local failures and their locations may have caused the total collapse as it was observed. Remember that the study has to reproduce the actual event itself faithfully. The reports on the building failures consisted of these. So there were two official reports because FEMA issued their report in May 2002. They came in right after the collapse. They did a preliminary study, and they simply pointed the way towards what they thought were areas that needed to be investigated further. Their report was in no way considered to be a final report. So NIST was tasked by the Congress. NIST is a branch of the Department of Commerce, and they were tasked to put their report together, and they issued that report in November of 2008, some 7 years after the event. Then there was a couple of reports that were privately paid for because the Con Edison had a substation that was underneath the building that was destroyed when the building collapsed. And they sued the World Trade Center properties and said that their design and construction was deficient and had damaged their interests, and therefore they were due to some compensation. So Arup Group issued a report for the plaintiffs in that case, Con Edison and their insurance company. And Weidlinger Associates was hired by the defendants, World Trade Center Properties, and they defended the World Trade Center Properties. And their information only became available in 2016 without their thermal load input. So there's some missing information there. Then there's our report, which, as we have stated, was issued in March of this year, done by the University of Alaska Fairbanks. So those are all the reports on the building failures. The building was located about 350 feet from the North Tower. You can see it here, and it was part of the World Trade Center complex, which consisted of 7 buildings. It was the northernmost building in that complex. And you see a rendering here on the right of what it looked like that day. It was 47 stories high. It had a floor area of about 1 acre. And again, here we're looking at it from the north. And again, I want to point out, this is after the towers had collapsed. Again, I want to point out the penthouse, the east penthouse on the top. It's an important aspect of the building failure, as it turns out. The building itself was trapezoidal. Here we see the plan view, the long side of the trapezoid on the north. It's irregular. It's not the same on both of its non-parallel sides, which also factors into the analysis of why it collapsed. Here we see a photo of it taken from the north, and we can see the Con Edison substation, which was 2 stories high, built underneath the building. Actually, it was built first, and then the building was built over it. This is a plan view of the caissons, showing that some of them were driven through the Con Edison substation, which is shaded area here, and some of them were outside to the south of the Con Edison substation. And these caissons were tied into the columns of the building, and that truss arrangement took up the first few floors of the building, so that the structure that we see here was from floor 7 up. Let's look at the structural frame of the building. It consisted of 58 perimeter columns and 24 columns in the core. And so there were girders connecting the columns and beams that tied into the girders, and that was the basic frame that supported the weight of the building and the loads that were applied to it. We're of particular interest with these 3 columns here, 79, 80, and 81. Again, the east penthouse was located on the roof over these columns. So these were the 3 most heavily loaded columns in the building. And in addition, you had the longest beams in the building framing into girders that supported column 79 in particular. So column 79 was the most heavily loaded column in the building. Column 80 and column 81 were also heavily loaded, second and third. And each of those columns, I'd like to point out, had 3 girders that framed into it, from the north, from the west, and from the south. And column 81, same thing, from the north, from the west, and from the south. That's also an important fact. So in our next frame, we're going to look at the what this looked like here. We're going to be standing here on the 13th floor. We'll be looking at this girder here, which connected column 44 and column 79. And that girder was a very long girder. It had 5 beams that framed into it. It was carrying a heavy load into the column. And we'll see those 5 beams and the girder in our next frame. So here we are. There's the girder. Column 44 is out here on the perimeter. Column 79 is over here in the core. And here are the beams that frame into the girder coming into it from the west. This photo shows what the construction looked like as the building went up. You see the perimeter columns here connected by girders and framing. The core columns here. You had a concrete deck for the floor. It was laid on a pan that was secured to the beams and the girders with shear studs. and you see that the columns were spliced in between the floors. So that's sort of the general construction of the building. So 7 hours after the Twin Towers came down, this 610-foot tall, 47-story steel frame building that was not hit by a plane collapsed and turned into a 5-story rubble pile in about 7 seconds. And again, here you see what it looked like. This is the east penthouse and the west penthouse. So we're going to see what that looks like as it collapsed right now. And I want to point out that when this video begins, and all the videos that are shown in this next clip begin after the east penthouse has already fallen through the roof of the building. So that occurred 7 seconds before the building started to come down. So that element of the collapse is missing in all these early videos. Later, we'll look at a video that actually shows the whole event. But I want you to keep that in mind as you watch this building collapse.
For the third time today, it's reminiscent of those pictures we've all seen too much on television before, when a building was deliberately destroyed by well-placed dynamite to knock it down.
Did they actually use the word brought down, and who was it that was telling you this?
The fire department. And they did use the word, we're going to have to bring it down.
We heard this sound that sounded like a clap of thunder. It looked like there was a shockwave ripping through the building, and the windows all bumped out. About a second later, the bottom floor caved out. The building followed after that, and we saw the building crash down all the way to the ground.
And I turned in time to see what looked like a skyscraper implosion. Looked like it had been done by a demolition crew. The whole thing just collapsing down on itself.
It was almost as if it were a planned implosion. It just pancaked.
The building itself was, like we said, about 350 feet away from the North Tower. And here's a picture taken during the collapse of the North Tower. And you can see that debris was thrown out from that collapse. Some of it did reach Building 7 on the south face. FEMA mapped the debris from both towers collapsing. And you can see here the light debris did contact the south face of the building. NIST mapped and gave us a pictorial view of what they thought that damage looked like. They said there was some damage down here in the southwest corner, low down in the building, and there was some damage to the south face near the center of the building, up near the top. However, NIST stated that this debris damage had little effect on initiating the collapse. So they don't think that that had much to do with the building coming down at all. As they said, they thought it was due to the fires that were supposedly initiated by the debris hitting the building. So diesel fuel was in the building because there was diesel generators backing up the power supply in the building, and those generators were down here on the 5th floor, and you can see that there was no fires there at the air intakes. So there were, although FEMA thought that maybe the diesel fuel had something to do with the building collapsing, NIST investigated that and said, no, we found most of the fuel in tanks below the building, and there was very little fuel in the building, and there was no evidence, visual or smell or anything like that, that would indicate that diesel fuel was a factor. So they ruled that out. Now, NIST recorded that there were fires on the 7th, 8th, and 9th floors, the 11th, 12th, and 13th floors, and 19, 22, 29, and 30. However, the fires on the upper 4 floors weren't active after about 1:30 because the sprinkler system for the upper floors of the building above floor 21 were fed by gravity from tanks in the upper part of the building. So that fire suppressant system worked and put those fires out. However, the floors on the bottom 6 floors were fed by a pressure system from the street, and for some reason that system did not work. There's still some debate about that as to whether it didn't work because the mains were broken or because the system was turned off for test that day. So at any rate, the fires on those 6 floors burned without any suppressant effort, and the fire department never went in there to fight them, so they burned uncontrolled. This picture of the fires was taken about an hour and a half before the building came down. This is again the north side, and we can see how the fires were traveling. For instance, on floor 7, the fire has been burning from the west to the east, and as it burns, it blows out the windows and it moves looking for new fuel. You see the same thing happening on the 8th floor. The fire is burning from west to east, and it's somewhere in the near middle of the building and also working its way over toward the east corner here. This is column 44. On the 12th floor, however, the fires are working in the opposite direction, curiously enough, from east to west. And you see that the 12th floor fire is all the way over here in the area of column 52 and 53. This is an hour and a half before the building collapsed. On the 13th floor, it's also working its way from east to west. And it's currently around area 44, 45, an hour and a half before the building collapsed. So those are the fires that NIST investigated and attributed the cause of the building collapse to those fires, particularly the fires on floor 12 and 13. So we're going to look at their theory here. This is the theory that they came up with. They said that the fires on floor 12 and 13 heated the beams in the northeast corner of the building, these 5 beams, and those beams pushed or pulled this girder, A2001, off of its seat at column 79. And when that girder fell, it precipitated a collapse of all the floors around it on the 12th floor below it, which then fell on to the floors all the way down to the 5th floor, so that all the floors connecting to column 79 between the 14th and the 5th floor were gone. Were not connected to the column anymore, and therefore the column, having a long span that was unsupported, buckled under its load, and then that caused the adjacent column 80 to buckle, and that in turn caused 81 to buckle. And then when those 3 columns had buckled, they caused the next row of columns in the core to fail. And then that proceeded across the building from east to west in the core. And once that had occurred, then the exterior columns all failed and the building came down. So that's their understanding of how the building collapsed. So we're going to look at that analysis in some detail. First of all, we'll look at the connection of the girder to the column at 79. And we see that it had a seat here. It was a seated connection. That is, it was a plate supported by another plate, which was welded to the column, and the girder sat on that seat. And they said that this seat was 11 inches wide. The width of this seat is important because if the girder is going to be pushed off of it or pulled off of it, how far did it have to move before it collapsed? So they said that this seat was 11 inches wide, but in reality, the bill of materials, which came out with the drawings, showed that it was 12 inches wide. So that even 1 inch is important in this scenario because inches matter here when this girder is going to fail. This is the NIST depiction of that connection. Here you see the girder itself. It's a deep high section. Has the web is carrying most of the weight. It sits on its seat, which is supported by the plate welded to the column. It has a couple of clips with bolts at the top and the bottom. And Here we see it in plan view, and we can see it comes at a slight angle to the column itself, which is a heavy section that has steel plates welded to the flanges of the column and protrude slightly past it. So that's the depiction that NIST gives us for that connection. Now we're going to look at the report that the UAF analysis came up with. And what they did was they took the entire 12th and 13th floor, just like NIST did, and they built a model of it. This is their model in Abacus. They used two different models, Abacus and SAP 2000, and they used these two models to check one against the other, which would be very conservative standard practice. Here we see the perimeter columns. We see the core columns. This is column 79, column 44, and this is the northeast corner of the building. So they took this model and they subjected it to the heat load, the same heat load that NIST applied to their model. And this is a picture of the floor temperatures and the frame temperatures that were used in the UAF model. This is the 13th floor, the floor and the frame. This is the 12th floor, the floor and the frame. And this snapshot occurred at 5 p.m. That is about 20 minutes before the building collapsed. And you can see that the temperatures are color-coded, and they range from about 675 degrees Celsius down to room temperature. And we see, according to their analysis, according to the heat input that they had, which UAF also used, that the maximum temperatures at this time were over here in the east side of the building. This is the floor, the concrete, and here we see the temperatures that the beams and the girder were subjected to. Looking closely at those temperature charts, here's the 13th floor. This is the east-west displacement. So let's look at this a little bit. Look at the colors. Zero movement is kind of this off orange yellow shade. So somewhere in here on that floor, the floor did not move at all due to the heat. In other words, when you heat anything, it's going to expand. And this particular model shows that the expansion was to the east over here on the east side of the building and to the west over here on the west side, so that the maximum movement of the floor frame occurred over here where the color is purple, and that shows a movement of about 5.6 inches to the east. So because the fire was most intense over here, this is where the maximum movement occurred. The movement over here in the west side of the building was much less, only about 3.5 inches, and it was moving to the west. So this whole thing is expanding away from its center of mass here in the middle somewhere. This is in the east-west direction. That is to your left and to your right. This diagram is for the north-south directions. Not as important because we're concerned with the east-west movement because that's what supposedly caused the failure. So I'm not going to go into that in great detail the way I did with the east-west movement. So the SAP 2000 analysis that UAF used showed that the movement of the floor in the X direction was about 2 inches to the east and about 3/4 of an inch to the north. And this is substantially less than the 1 inch, than the 6.25 inches that NIST said this movement was. And the reason was because, I'm just going to back up a bit, because NIST, in the NIST model, they took this east wall of the building as being fixed. They said it didn't move at all. The UAF analysis said it moved over 5.5 inches. Well, if this wall is moving to the east, then that means that a lot of the expansion of these beams is going to be to the east. However, if you fix this wall and heat the beams, then all the expansion has to go to the east. So the assumption that NIST made that east wall did not move at all is not grounded in any kind of reality, because we know that when we heat that whole floor, it is going to expand away from its centroid. It's not going to fix itself here and move everything to the west. The abacus analysis showed pretty much the same thing. The column, the direction in the X movement was 1.5 and 1.85 inches to the east and a little less than an inch to the north. So there's high degree of corroboration there. They did do an analysis on this program with no shear studs on the beams or the girders, with shear studs on the beams only, and with shear studs on both the beams and the girder. And that's because NIST claimed that there were no shear studs on the girder. UAF wanted to check out, see how much that changed with the addition of the shear studs. The shear studs are mounted on the top of the beams and the girders to secure the floor to the beams and girders and make sure that it acts compositely. But that had no serious effect on the outcome of the UAF conclusions. NIST, using the NIST boundary conditions, as I said, assuming that this east wall of the building is fixed, and then heating the system with the heat load that NIST called for, the UAF analysis only got a movement of 5.11 inches to the west, whereas in order for the NIST model to work, they needed more than 6.25 inches. So even if you use the input data that NIST came up with, you can't get their model to act like they said it did. And we can't check that because they won't release that information to us, which we'll talk about in a bit. So the second approach was to evaluate their collapse initiation hypothesis. So here we have the abacus model that shows the northeast corner of the building, the beams, the girder, the columns. And looking at the column itself, we see that it had side plates that were welded to the flanges, and they stuck out about 1.8 inches past the flange. And that's important because when you heat the beams and the girders, here we have a plan view looking at the beams framing into the girder here, and the girder is sitting on its seat at the column, and you heat those up, well, they expand. So the beam expands and pushes on the girder, and the girder is also heated and it expands. So that means that it closes the distance up to the column with its expansion. And as the beam attempts to push it, it gets trapped behind the side plate. So there's no way that that girder can come off of the seat as proposed by NIST because of this trapping that occurs when you heat the system up. In addition, there's other problems, and that is this. Here's the NIST representation, as we saw, of the girder attached to the seat at the column. And they depict it this way, but when you look at the actual drawings, you see that there were stiffeners that were welded to the web and to the lower flange of the girder. And those stiffeners are going to affect how that girder is going to behave if and when it ever gets pushed this way, because the in addition to stiffening the girder web, these plates are also going to stiffen the lower flange. So even if you were able to move this girder so that the web gets past the seat, the stiffeners are going to stiffen the flange, and the flange won't curl up and the girder won't fall. We know that those stiffeners were there because we've got the construction photos that show them. And here's a pictorial view to give us a little better idea of what we're looking at. Here's the beam, here's the girder, here's the stiffener plate welded to the web and welded to the lower flange. Here's the seat. Here's the plate that supports the seat. Here's the column. That's what we're looking at. That's the way the actual construction was made. The NIST representation in their report, however, doesn't show any stiffeners. Here we see it. The stiffener should be right here at the end of the girder, and they're not there. And they admitted that they left those stiffeners off. And their explanation went something like this. They said that the web stiffeners, they call them web stiffeners, were added to prevent web crippling. They didn't want the web to cripple. And their analysis didn't show that the web crippled, so therefore they left the web crippling plates off of their analysis. However, that completely ignores the fact that the stiffeners would also stiffen the flange. And the flange would be something like 80 times stiffer with those stiffeners there than they would without it. So this statement that they make here is completely unscientific and has no place really in an engineering analysis. And we note that it was signed by somebody in their public affairs office, not an engineer. The UAF analysis tested that theory out by removing the side plates on the column and pushing the girder so that the web was well past the edge of the seat. And with the stiffeners on there, we see that there's very little stress of any serious significance in the lower flange. And this, what we do see is just because the girder itself is pressed up against the flange of the column. But there's no failure here of that lower flange. The UAF analysis then went further and said, okay, well, let's, none of those things were working out, but let's go ahead and let the girder fall and see what happens, see if we get the cascade of floor failures below. So they let the girder fall. It hits the same girder below it on the 12th floor. And it's easy to figure out how much force you're going to have to hit it with because the plate that is welded to the column supports the seat. And we know through a very quick analysis that force that you're going to need to break those wells loose is about 632,000 pounds. So that's how hard you're going to have to hit that 12th floor to break it loose. So we did an impact analysis, and here's the, I'm just going to run through this very quickly because it's fairly technical, but basically you have to find the frequency of this system as it falls, and then using that you can get stiffness. Once you have its stiffness, you can find the deflection that is going to occur when it hits the floor. And once you know that deflection, you can figure the force. And the force turns out to be about 62,000 pounds, which is less than 10% of what we know we need. So that a portion of the NIST analysis doesn't work either. So we're getting a steady stream of failures here in terms of checking their analysis. We can't get the girder to push off the seat. We can't get the girder to fall from the seat. We can't get the floor below it to break loose. And so we're running into what we now see is a series of problems with their analysis. Then we're going to simulate the global collapse with the UAF study. And here you're going to see the entire sequence of events in the failure, because this film starts early enough so that we can see the east penthouse up here. Here's the screen wall. Here's the west penthouse. And we're going to watch this come down. And this falls through the floor, through the roof of the building, about 7 seconds before the building itself starts to come down. So we'll see the east penthouse fall. Then 5 or 6 seconds later, we'll see the screen wall start to fall, and the west penthouse then disappears, and then the building comes down. So I want to verify that that's actually what we're seeing. There goes the east penthouse. See window breakage down here. Then the west, and then the screen wall begins to go, the west penthouse, and then the building itself. Once again. So it turns out that that's a very important consideration, because if this building was brought down by controlled demolitions, why would they want this penthouse to fall through the roof before the building came down? Well, remember we talked about the fact that there were buildings nearby. If you keep this heavy weight up on top of the roof and your sequence of explosions down below isn't exactly timed properly, then it's possible that the building could tip over because the weight is eccentric. So this is a standard practice in building demolition, is to bring down the heavy equipment on the top into the frame of the building before you bring the building down itself. So actually, what we're observing in the collapse of the East Penthouse is a kind of a telltale event that shows that this must have been a controlled demolition. Now, in the NIST model, they say that down here in the lower portion of the building, this is where the collapse initiation event occurred. And they're saying that that event down here low in the building also caused the East Penthouse to fall through the roof. That's their explanation for how the East Penthouse came down through the roof. But we know that there were 3 connections to those columns all the way up, which is 102 connections between the 14th floor and the 47th floor. And each one of those was a shear connection designed to resist shear, so that when the weight was removed down here, the columns couldn't fail immediately and cause the East Penthouse to come down. Again, NIST will not release their input data, so we cannot check and find out how they made this happen. But according to their model, when this failure occurs low down, you see the East Penthouse fall through the roof.
And Roland, I just wanted to let you know that if you could wrap it up in 1 minute, we'll all be still on schedule.
Okay. All right. So let's look at this comparison. You see that the NIST model doesn't look like anything like the actual event. So their model a little further on looks like this. You can see there's great distortion of the building, not anything like the real event. When the UAF analyzed failing the columns down low versus failing them up high, they saw that you had to fail those columns up high in order to get the East Penthouse to fall through the roof first. So that was a separate event. Furthermore, they said, if you use their model and collapse these 3 columns first and these 3 columns next, what happens is the exterior columns in the southeast corner of the building are overloaded and the building falls over to the southeast. And this is what that would look like. So nothing about the NIST analysis works. We see it again here from this. The UAF said you had to take out 8 core columns down low in the building, followed 1.3 seconds later by the perimeter columns. And that's what you got to reproduce the event as it actually happened. So that's what the UAF analysis showed. Showed again here. Failure up high first. And remember, there's no fires up high. So NIST has no explanation for what would have caused that East Penthouse to collapse in the way it did. Then there's the free fall analysis. Building went into free fall about 3/4 of a second after it started to fall. There's no explanation for free fall.
Just by watching it, anybody can see that Building 7 fell close to free fall. To measure it, I used software to track the corner of the building and compute a graph of downward velocity as a function of time. The graph had a long, straight section indicating constant acceleration. Measuring the slope, I found the acceleration to be within 1% of the acceleration of gravity for the first 2.5 seconds. In other words, the building fell through its own structure with 0 resistance.
So that's impossible. The NIST analysis said it was caused by columns buckling. The columns always will give some resistance to downward motion, so their analysis can't account for free fall. there's only one way you can get free fall, and that's to take things out. And that's what the UAF model showed. You have to take out 8 stories. These columns did not fail at the lower floors in the building. In order for the east penthouse to fall, you had to take the columns out up high. There's no floors up there, no fires up there. And when you take out the 3 easternmost core columns, you don't get a horizontal progression of core column failures. Instead, it falls over to the side. So all the hypothesis of NIST and the other engineering reports are invalid. And you had to take out the east penthouse separately up high. And if we assume what they did, that the next row of columns, core columns would fail, then the exterior columns would fail and the building would fall over to the southeast. And the simultaneous fall, the only way you can get the observed failure is to take out 8 stories low down in the building all at once, and then take out the perimeter columns, same area, 1.3 seconds later, and that gives you what you need to see. And that should have to happen somewhere beneath the 16th floor, so that the collapse of the building was a global failure involving near simultaneous failure of all columns in the building over 8 stories, not a progressive collapse, which would be a sequential failure that NIST put forward. And the UAF team was unable to identify any progressive sequence of failures that would have taken and caused a total collapse of the building in a straight down fashion with 2.5 seconds of free fall. So this means we need a new study, and we call for an independent political study that's independent of political and economic conflicts of interest, with architects, engineers, and scientific experts fully funded and staffed, and publish that study with recommendations for future action, including criminal investigations. Okay.
Wow. That was extraordinary, Roland. Now we've got a lot of questions for you from our audience. So we're going to jump right into those at this point. And then I'll just tell people where they can learn more about the Twin Towers in a moment. In fact, I'll do that right now, and then we'll get to those questions. We have a very interesting, well, let's do this. And this. And where did that go? There we go. A detailed presentation set, a series of 3, 9/11 An Architect's Guide at AE 9/11 Truth. We actually give this webinar every Thursday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. And they're all archived on YouTube. So people can learn more about about Building 7 there, in addition to what Roland has already presented you, which is a lot about the study itself. And part 2 goes into the explosiveness of the Twin Towers, and an extraordinary amount of evidence there. And then part 3 of this webinar focuses on the extreme heat at the Twin Towers. So in terms of DVDs, I just want everybody to know that we're going to give you 2 of these classic presentations on this subject of all 3 towers, the demolition, 9/11 Blueprint for Truth, the Architecture of Destruction. So just put Blueprint for Truth in that email to me, info@ae911truth.org, and say, hey, I want 2 free. Now, guess what? You get 2 of them, but we can only give 2 of you 2 of them. So it's the first 2 that call us. Why are we doing that? Once again, we're here to raise funds for Matt Campbell's inquest in the UK. And that's why all of our speakers are donating their time today and tomorrow and yesterday, so that we can raise the necessary funds. So there's no fee to watch this, but by gosh, if you can send $5 or $10 at ae911truth.org, YouTube.com/Justice Rising, where you can also watch this this presentation. I'm going to also send you 2 of these. What is it? Firefighters, Architects, Engineers Expose 9/11 Myths. Eric Lawyer and myself. Just put firefighters on the email. And if you're a different set of 2, the first 2 that we get at info@ae911truth.org, we will send that to you also. Now, Roland, a couple of questions from our audience for you. Did the 9/11 Commission ever speculate what started those fires on floor 13 and below, as this building was not hit by an airplane?
The NIST report claims that the fires were started by the debris that hit the building when the North Tower collapsed. That has never been seriously, they made that statement. They said, well, that must have been it, because that's the only thing that occurred that could have caused the fires. However, I think the question, a legitimate question, is why were the floors going from east to west on some floors and going from west to east on the other floors? So there's that's a supposition. I don't know. That's their only answer for that question.
Okay, here's another one. Did the beams have fire treatment, and was that accounted for in NIST and Alaska's analysis? Both. And there's another question after that. This gentleman asked too.
Sure.
Yeah. If you can keep your answers just as short as you did the last one, we'll get through all these questions actually.
All right. Well, yes, the beams did have fire. They were fire retardant. They met the code. They had fire retardant sprayed on them, and that was accounted for. Actually, I think in the UAF study they said, let's take the fire. Let's be very conservative in our approach. Take the fireproofing off and see what happens then. So, in the UAF analysis, they did everything possible to try to make the NIST model work. They gave them every consideration, gave them every break. None of it worked.
Wow. How long would it have taken to wire Building 7 for a controlled demolition? This viewer asks.
I think that would depend upon what kind of resources you had and what kind of manpower you had and what kind of access you had. Theoretically, it could be, once you had a plan and once you had your materials together, I think it could probably be done in a relatively short period of time, providing you had unlimited access to the building.
Okay, then. Did the beams have, how do they justify the outer shell standing for the time that they claim it did, while the inside of the building was falling? This explanation alone doesn't make sense to me, the viewer says.
Well, the standard procedure in a controlled demolition would be to take down the core, and when the core drops, it pulls down the floor beams and girders with it, and those pull the perimeter columns in, such you get what's called a P delta effect, which is you pull the if you're pulling the columns in a significant distance midway in their span or somewhere in the middle of their span, then the load on the building from above snaps. You see that inside, like if you had a straw. If you took a straw and put your finger on it and then pulled it, the middle of the straw inward toward you, at some point it pops through and it loses almost all of its resistance. So then the building falls.
And in the case of NIST, even that resistance remains at 25%, even after the column snaps, not snaps, but buckles. So how much resistance is left, and could that account for the free falling of the building as is measured by physicists?
Well, there's always going to be some resistance. When the column fails, there'll always be, if a column is buckling, even after it snaps through, and you can see in the graph there, we didn't have too much time to go over that, but when you looked at the analysis that David Chandler gave us, you see that after 2.5 seconds, the rate of descent slows down. That's due to the buckling of the columns that's occurring after the 8 stories of columns have been removed. So with columns buckling, you can never get free fall. There's always some resistance. The only way you can get free fall is to remove all the material entirely. So that's what you do with a controlled demolition. You blow out a section of the columns and enable the building to enter free fall, and you use that gravity load, the entire load of the building, to break up the structure below.
Well, then this viewer says, if NIST admitted that there was free fall, how is there still a debate?
There's not a debate. NIST will not answer us. We presented this information to NIST, as I think you covered in your presentation yesterday. We submitted a request to correction. Our report has been public since last March. NIST has not responded. They have not attempted to defend themselves. They simply say, we stand by our analysis. In other words, we're going to ignore everything that you have to say that has to do with physics and mechanics of materials and what we know about structures, et cetera, et cetera. We're standing by our analysis. They are simply, they're in a castle. They've drawn up the moat, they've drawn up the drawbridge, and they're hiding inside. They're not talking.
I guess that makes us the opposing enemy. What's our strategy?
Well, that's a good question. I personally, I believe that we need to remove the obstacle that our professional engineering societies have provided to an open investigation. That is, you've got the American Society of Civil Engineers, the National Society of Professional Engineers, the National Alliance of Forensic Engineers. They've all come out and supported the NIST report without taking on any of the questions that we've raised. They've simply said, we support the NIST report. The NIST people then say, well, see, we've got the engineering profession behind us, and they are supporting us, so therefore we don't have to answer any questions. Well, that doesn't solve the problem. We have filed a complaint. We filed a grievance with the American Society of Civil Engineers because they have refused to publish our papers that question and show that their theory, which they back up as to the way the towers collapse, they refuse to publish our papers. So all these organizations, these professional organizations, NIST, and the government have simply stopped discussing this at all. They do not want to discuss it. They will not release their data. They are hiding.
Okay, well, this viewer is then asking about the engineering school curriculums, and if studying Building 7's unprecedented collapse, the third worst structural failure in modern history after the Twin Towers, is it a major course of study? How many engineering universities are even looking at this building's collapse?
We have not been able to find one engineering curriculum in any university that is studying this collapse. And we are taking our information with Project Due Diligence out to the universities and to the local branches of the engineering societies, and we are presenting this information to them. And we have yet to find a single engineer or an engineering student that has taken exception to our analysis. So we know that once we present this information to people that have the background to understand it, that they agree with us 100%. It's unanimous. However, they are taking steps to try to prevent us from even presenting this information to those people by issuing statements to those branches and to those organizations and to those universities saying that they stand behind the NIST report and they don't think it requires any further study.
Wow. Well, okay. How about this one? AE 911 Truth reported that the official report from NIST omitted structural features such as the shear studs and the stiffeners that you mentioned, and that this affects the outcome of their hypothesis. Has there been any acknowledgement of this by NIST? And if so, what have they done about it?
Well, we have their answer to the request for corrections, and basically they say, doesn't matter, we stand by our report, we're not changing anything. So we are
Larry, can you bring me sorry, go ahead, Roland. I meant to go on mute.
We're not, we're in the process of appealing that decision. And at this point, as I said, they are adamant that they are not going to release their information or their data, and they're not going to discuss it further. They stand behind the reports.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Roland. Stand by here. I want people to see what happens. And I'll spend 2 minutes sharing with people the outline, just the outline of our evidence at the Twin Towers. Because there are features of controlled demolition that are both typical and atypical. And let's just look at them. We have a sudden onset of the destruction at the base of the towers. Not the base, but the jet plane impacts, because this is deceptive controlled demolition. We have patterned explosions and flashes of light heard and seen by witnesses, and I mean hundreds of them. We have a straight down symmetrical progression outside the building's footprint. In the case of the Twin Towers, a very explosive event versus the very controlled implosion of Building 7. At the Twin Towers, we have ejections of building materials landing, accelerating at 80 miles an hour laterally out of the towers, landing 600 feet in every direction and impacting the buildings around them for 600 feet. Remember, gravity works down. We have a near free fall acceleration straight down through the path of what should have been the greatest resistance, the 80,000 tons of structural steel beneath the point of jet plane impacts. But instead, it gets faster and faster and faster, almost 2/3 of free fall. This is almost as fast as the bowling ball falling out of the sky. We have the total shattering of the structural steel system from top to bottom. All the columns and beams are separated from one from another. We have the lateral ejection of these freely flying structural steel sections trailed by thick white smoke clouds. Steel isn't flammable. What's causing the ends of these beams to be on fire? I mean, even jet fuel is only burns according to its manufacturer at 600 degrees Fahrenheit in open air. So in steel, begins to melt maybe at about 2,800 degrees. So the official story can't account for these incredible temperatures or the pulverization of the concrete. All the concrete is outside the footprint of the building in a 3 square mile area. All the steel is in a 600 foot radius around each of these buildings. So that's 2/3 the weight of the buildings, the concrete and the steel. It's outside the footprint. So how can it be crushing the building below? These are the kind of things we talk about in this webinar and in our DVD 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. And the presence of molten steel and iron that is found and documented by first responders and one of our upcoming guests, Stephen Jones. And the presence of thermite incendiaries, specifically nanothermite, found and documented by a team of 8 researchers led by our next speaker, Niels Harrit, professor of nanotechnology. So with all of this evidence, this is direct evidence of destruction with explosives. Fire doesn't create any of these features, let alone all of them. With additional circumstantial corroborative testimony, forensic evidence, eyewitness testimony, experts agreeing, and the illegal destruction of evidence in a massive crime scene, the crime of the century. This, to 3,300 architects and engineers, is direct evidence of proof of controlled demolition at the Twin Towers. And that's why we put all this in a chart card, and I'm going to send you 50 of them if you just email me. The first two who email me, info@ae911truth.org. This is the same chart card you see on your screen. So please write chart on that email. Send it to me at info@ae911truth.org, and we'll get that off to you. Again, why are we doing that? Because we want you to donate to the Jeff Campbell Justice Campaign. We've got to raise $100,000 by tomorrow night. We've done 85% of it now. So, I mean, like, we're really getting there. I mean, this is one of the top attorneys in London. He's taken on successfully the government there. He's on our side. He's reviewed all the evidence. He's overwhelmingly convinced. This is a tailor-made opportunity for us to get the evidence into the international court system. And you guys are going to help us. I just know it. So here's what I want to do. Next, I want to give a big thanks to Roland Engel. And thank you, Roland. Any final comments before we let you go, Roland?
I would just say, for those of you that are watching that have any connection with engineers, with engineering associations, professional organizations, with colleges or universities or whatever, that you contact us and help us get a presentation, project due diligence, in front of those organizations and their members, because we have to build a movement from the bottom up in those organizations, because the leadership is clearly has sold us out. So if you can help us in that regard, I think that's the most important thing that anybody can do. Other than, if you're not in the field, please talk to people about this and watch the movie Seven and contribute to our organization. Give us some money so that we can proceed with all these various methods that we are using to bring this story to light.
Yeah, thank you, Roland. Yeah, the government is not helping us to get the word out here, that's for sure. Large donors, corporate donors are not helping us whatsoever. And so, Roland, on behalf of the entire 9/11 Truth movement, thank you for organizing 60 volunteers under your Project Due Diligence effort, who have now given dozens and dozens of informative presentations to organizations all over the country in the engineering field. We owe an incredible debt of gratitude to you. And so thank you so much, and we'll catch up with you real soon.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you. And sorry to cut you off there. We're going to move on now to Injustice Rising with Science Saturday, to what for me personally is one of the highlights of this entire conference. Yes, we have none other than David Ray Griffin with us today. And I'm not kidding you. You're going to actually see his face. It's been so long. We have and other guests too, but let me bring you the presence of David Ray Griffin himself. There he is, almost present in the flesh. David Ray Griffin is an emeritus professor of philosophy of religion and theology at Claremont School of Theology and Claremont Graduate University. He's published more than 36 books, mostly in the philosophy and science religion, but 14 of these deal specifically with 9/11, including his first book on the subject, The New Pearl Harbor, Disturbing Questions About the Bush Administration and 9/11, published in 2004. He started way before I did. In 2011, he co-founded the 9/11 Consensus Panel, which I hope he'll talk about tonight as well. Now, David Ray Griffin was the one that I heard on the radio when I was on my way back from a construction observation meeting on March 29th in 2006, listening to Bonnie Faulkner's radio Guns and Butter here in the San Francisco Bay Area. David Ray Griffin was talking about the oral histories of the first responders, 118 witnesses of explosions in the towers, seeing flashes of light as documented by Professor Graham McQueen, whom he was drawing from in his research that day. I was so stunned that I had to pull over in my van in a parking lot and just sit there and listen. I couldn't believe my ears. I said, I'm an architect. I would have heard about this, right? I mean, I would have heard if there was a third tower that came down on 9/11. The AIA hasn't issued one bulletin to any of its 90,000 members on the third worst structural failure in modern history after the Twin Towers. So we're going to bring him on, but first let me introduce you also to Stephen Jones, PhD. He's a former professor of physics at Brigham Young University. He conducted his PhD research at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center and postdoctorate research at Cornell University and the Los Alamos Mason Physics Facility. Jones was the initiator of research of the peer-reviewed paper, Active Thermitic Materials Observed in the Dust from the 9/11 World Trade Center Catastrophe, published in the Open Chemical Physics Journal. Oops. There's Stephen Jones, almost in the flesh also. And thank you, Larry. It's hard to keep track of everything around here. So much going on. He's also the author of the influential paper, which turned my head around as well. Why indeed did the World Trade Center buildings collapse? Because it was Stephen Jones who alerted us to the contents of the dust, finding molten iron microspheres, previously molten iron, which was then corroborated by the U.S. Geological Survey. All of its dust studies find these strange, small, almost naked to the human eye, molten iron microspheres everywhere. 6% of some of these dust samples, but they're in all the dust samples. They're up to 4 tons of these molten iron microspheres. This is all in our, as a matter of fact, this is also covered in the San Francisco press conference, which you can get for free, 2 of them. If 2 of you email me, press conference at info@ae911truth.org. Stephen Jones and David Ray Griffin are featured in our San Francisco press conference when we had 1,000 architects and engineers signed on to the petition. Of course, now we have 3,300. And so we'll send these to you too. And you know why, because we want you to donate to the Jeff Campbell campaign. Now, I'm going to go on and introduce also one of our other heroes, one of the other pioneers in the 9/11 truth movement, Mr. Niels Harrit, PhD, served as an associate professor of chemistry at the University of Copenhagen from 1971 to 2009 until his retirement. He's the author of more than 60 published peer-reviewed papers. Since 2007, he's been actively involved in the global movement for 9/11 truth and is the lead author of a scientific paper published in April of 2009 describing the findings of active thermitic material in the World Trade Center dust from the collapses of these 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers. Niels has lectured extensively all over the world on the World Trade Center evidence. And now, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me incredible pleasure to introduce you to our 3 esteemed guests. Here's Stephen Jones, and
Hello.
Here is David Ray Griffin, and here is Mr. Niels Harrit. Gentlemen, how are we all?
Good, thanks. It's good to
Never
see you all.
before
Great, Stephen, right?
have we been on one
Fantastic.
platform.
Pardon?
I mean, this is just awesome. I have chills all over my body. You guys built the 9/11 truth movement with so many others, but you are the key pioneers that have given us the evidence, the research that gave so much credibility. Say something and tell us why you came back and are here to share with us. And then I'll turn it over to you one at a time after that.
David?
What
All
did
right,
you say, David?
You're
You should start.
nominated.
I got offline, so what do you want from me?
I'd like you to share with us why you're here right now, just for a minute. And then we'll hear from each of the others, and then we'll go back to you for an extended talk here.
Okay, well, I'm very happy to be here, and I'm happy to see Niels and Stephen, as well as you, Richard. And I'm here because you asked me to come. And so I think it's a very, well, obviously, if I written so many books about it, I think it's a very important issue. And I think this method of dealing with it is a very helpful one, especially given the pandemic, that we can't come together physically. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, awesome that you're here. I'm telling you, I'm just speechless. Stephen, let's jump to you next. Why are you here? Other than the fact that I cajoled you, I twisted your arm. We're so delighted to hear from you guys. Talk to us.
Oh, thanks. It's great to be here. It's great to see Niels and David again, and you too, Richard. I will be talking a little bit. I have been active as what I can do in research, and in particular with regard to 9/11. I'll talk about that a little bit. So I'm glad to be back on the air with you under these strange circumstances, which circumstances remind us of 9/11, the big lie of 9/11. Some of us are starting to detect there's something fishy, there's something very rotten in Denmark, you would say, Niels, and as we look at this reaction to this virus. I mean, I'm not questioning the reality of virus, but I'm questioning the lockdowns and all that going on.
Right
so
on.
Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit if we have time too. The parallels between 9/11 and COVID-19 lockdowns reaction.
Okay. Yeah, some have called it another 9/11. Niels, I forgot to mention to our esteemed audience here who we've brought in you here today, right now. Niels Harrit is primarily responsible for this paper, as I mentioned, but what they found in this paper, people, because Niels isn't here to talk about the paper, so I want you to know that they found up to 4 tons by extrapolation, the red-gray chips with red on one side, gray on the other. The red side has been proven by chemical analysis to be primarily composed of thermite, iron oxide, and aluminum powder. What is that doing in these chips, which we thought were paint, but no, they're attracted by a magnet. This is not paint. When put in a heater, a differential scanning calorimeter, you guys found that they ignite, producing what? The molten iron microspheres that Dr. Stephen Jones had documented earlier, which is obviously and only could be the evidence of thermite incendiaries, because thermite issues molten iron at 4,000 degree temperatures, which the jet fuel, of course, in office fires can possibly account for. So these chips are clearly a self-corroborating, repeatable set of experimentally reproducible evidence that could put a lot of people away if we can only get a court system to respond to it. And yes, we have submitted all of your guys' evidence in these forms to a petition in a grand jury for a grand jury investigation, in our FBI lawsuit, in our request for correction to NIST, and we will be submitting it next month to the UK in the court system there to get this new Jeff Campbell justice campaign going and into the court system and approved by the attorney general there for the new inquest into his brother's death. Because all this evidence, especially what you, Stephen, and Niels have done here, we've waited a long time. That paper was produced in 2009. Stephen's work earlier than that with the iron microspheres. And these are the shoulders, you guys, that we're standing on right now. We're witnessing. And so, Niels, just a couple of comments from you, and then we'll jump into David Ray Griffin.
Me as well. I'm deeply honored and, of course, accepted this invitation without any hesitation. And I'm very happy and very glad to see old friends on the same screen, even though we cannot be at the same place and time. And it has been a long time. And so it's really a peak also in my personal life to be here with all three of you. But David and Steve both preceded me in time. I got on board in 2006. I'll be happy to make a more detailed account of how I actually woke up to reality. But, and I hope we'll eventually return to the nanoscience, nanothermite later on. And because I believe I have a coherent collapse scenario for the Twin Towers, which I can do very shortly. And I also acknowledge that we are in serious times, and we are at a point where science is breaking down. I'm sure both my academic colleagues may agree on that. We are past evidence. In some ways, we have been bombed back to ages before Galileo, and we are simply ignoring evidence. And 9/11, of course, is a prime example of that. So still, in my opinion, 9/11 is key because everyone can count to three. Okay, there were 2 airliners and 3 high-rises. It's as simple as that. So 9/11 is key still, even though many things are getting more complicated these days. But I'll be happy to return to the more technical issues later.
Oh, wonderful. Let's jump right in then to David Ray Griffin. David, you have the floor, and we're standing by with you.
Okay, I'm just going to respond to the list of questions I was given. The first was, what alerted you to the 9/11 problem? Well, there was a student at my school, the Claremont School of Theology, who came to me one day and said, there's a visiting scholar here who said 9/11 is an inside job. I believe the scholar was from England. And she said, ask if I wanted to talk to him. And I said, of course. So I talked to him and then started asking for evidence. I didn't find it convincing. But then I was told by 2 other colleagues and about other types of evidence, other websites, especially Paul Thompson's timeline, 9/11 timeline. And I was told about this by Fred Burks, who had quite an interesting life himself. And the next question was, what inspired you to get involved? So I had been asked by students to give a talk about Iraq. The war in Iraq had just started. And so I did, and I gave the talk about 9/11 as being the pretense for the attack on Iraq. And so for my lecture, I used, of course, the timeline and then some really good books that had been published already. Gore Vidal, Nafiz Ahmed, and I'm sorry, I lost my place here. Oh, and Michel Chossudovsky. So I use those books primarily in the new Pearl Harbor. And so another question was, I sort of added this question myself because I'm here on a science day and I'm not a scientist. And so a question that has come to me often is, has being a theologian helped or hurt? And in many respects, it has actually helped. I had got my book became well known because of a review by Catholic theologian Rosemary Ruther. And then the next question was, how did New Pearl Harbor get published? Well, it took quite a lot of work. I sent it to many publishers, and there were no takers. One publisher called Common Courage said, just gave a three-word answer, not for us. And at least they didn't call themselves Uncommon Courage. So then I contacted a left-wing British publisher, and the one person I talked to was very excited about it. He wanted to get to know me and that, but then it turned out that the project was killed upstairs. But he made a good suggestion. He said, well, you should call your book the new Reichstag. And but I said, you know, Americans don't know about the Reichstag. But I said, they do know about the Pearl Harbor attacks. And so that's how the title got started. My friend Richard Falk, and I talked to him about finding a publisher. And he had published with many publishers, and he recommended my book to many of them, but none of them responded, even to Richard Falk. And then he mentioned that you know, he had just published a book by Olive Press, or Interlink is the other name for it, and he had worked with an editor named Pam Thompson, and so I learned later that she responded about Richard's suggestion by saying, you know, Richard says on his website that Griffin is sensible, but he's a conspiracy theory. So she didn't know what to do, and she asked her father, who happened to be a Presbyterian minister, and he said, David Ray Griffin, I've read all of his books. So that's how the new Pearl Harbor got published. I've been also asked, which of your books do you recommend the most? I would say my first really good book on this was the 9/11 Commission Report, Omissions and Distortions. And then there was the New Pearl Harbor Revisited, which was much superior to the original New Pearl Harbor. I also published a book called Debunking 9/11 Debunking. And it turned out to be one of my favorites because the publisher at Interlink said, you know, I don't think I can sell a book with a title like that. It turned out that Debunking 9/11 Debunking was my favorite, was the public's most favorite book of mine after the New Pearl Harbor. So I got to say, I told you so.
Pretty awesome. By the way, David, do you mind if I give away one of your other books, which is a favorite of mine, 9/11 and American Empire. Intellectuals
Oh yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit
speak
about
out.
it.
Okay, well, when you do, okay. Not yet, everybody. I gave it away, didn't I, David? Okay.
My next,
Go ahead.
favorite
Send me
book
info at 1811
called Bush and
What?
Cheney, how they destroyed America and the America and the world. And I talked about a lot of things. The last part of the book talked about 9/11 and all the evidence, but the first parts of the book talked about related areas, and one of them was a chapter on Islamophobia. So for our interest today, that was particularly important. Finally, there's 9/11 Unmasked, which I edited with Elizabeth Woodworth, and it's popular because, with me at least, because a publisher, excuse me, a writer named Philip Rodas wrote for the Off Guardian 17 years on what really happened on 9/11. So Rodas had written really negative things about 9/11 and had called it really bad names and as really as nonsense. And but he was willing to write a review for Off Guardian, and he ended up saying, "This is as strong a prima facie evidence for throwing out NIST as ever contributed to an official cover-up. I'll close with the recommendation to all who have been, as I had been, that had held the view that the 9/11 truther case was too silly for serious consideration. I was wrong. Buy the book." Then I was asked what were some high points of my dealing with 9/11. I've already mentioned the Griffin review by Roland. I was invited to give a lecture at the University of Wisconsin.
About a minute.
Yeah, David, something happened to your microphone there.
I know nothing about this stuff, so I have no idea.
Okay, there you go. You sound good now.
Back? Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah, I didn't make my font large enough, so I have to lean forward to see my notes. And anyway, I gave this lecture at the University of Wisconsin. C-SPAN came to record it, and this lecture then introduced serious 9/11 studies.
Okay, we just lost you again. You're coming and going. Can we take the microphone off of? Oh, is it up on your body? Is that where it is?
No, it's I've got my wife's phone, computer, and
okay, well, it's fine now. Keep going.
okay.
Yeah, it comes and goes, unfortunately.
Okay, sorry. I'll try not to move. And,
Maybe that's.
So this was in 2005 that C-SPAN published this lecture. This lecture then turned into the book that you mentioned, Stephen, 9/11 and the American Empire, Intellectuals Speak Out, which I co-edited with Peter Dale Scott. And so through the lecture, through the C-SPAN and then this book, we got several intellectuals interested in 9/11 who had not been interested in it before. this led to many tours. I had a tour in Europe, which I went to London and Hamburg and Copenhagen and Amsterdam, and Norway and Sweden, and then
Paris.
Pardon?
Paris.
Oh
Paris.
yeah,
We
sorry.
met in Paris. Yeah.
Sorry. Niels was with me there in Paris.
Yeah. Switzerland.
And, one of the best evenings I had in my life, in fact. And
What
then,
happened there?
and then a big tour in the East Coast, in which I did 10 cities in 11 days. So that's the summary of the ask. Also, are we making progress in the movement? And I said yes, in the sense that we have introduced evidence that is, irrefutable, as was pointed out in the previous lecture. And all this evidence has been summarized in 9/11 Unmasked. And then, of course, the question is, have we made any progress in getting acceptance? And I would say a little bit. And then, what do I have hopes for? And I believe the lawyers committee may result in uncovering the truth to the public. So that's good. That's mine.
Pretty awesome. Pretty awesome. We're going to come back because there's a lot of questions developing for you guys. So let's bring on Stephen Jones, and thank you so much for sharing your heart with us today, David. Stand by. You're all still on camera, and Stephen, just wondering if you could come closer to the camera. Just
Sure.
want to make your head the same size as all the rest of us so we can see your beautiful face.
Well,
thank you. Welcome.
I haven't been called a beautiful face for a while, Richard.
We're getting over, guys.
David's comment about New Pearl Harbor reminded me of the PNAC document, with which we're all familiar, I'm sure. The 2000 publication by the Project for the New American Century, in which they discussed a transformation in society. They used the term transformation, and they said this transformation cannot occur absent a new Pearl Harbor. A year later, 9/11, 2001 occurred. The new Pearl Harbor, as David pointed out in his excellent book. And I want to point out that we're undergoing this transformation. It is, I consider that the COVID epidemic, some call it a plandemic, but the reaction to it, I think, is more planned. In any case, the reaction has been draconic in some areas, severe. The lockdowns are ill-advised. The mask wearing is not very scientific as far as I can see. I've looked at the data. Masks don't seem to help. Lockdowns don't help. As we look at the data, for instance, from Sweden, which had very good results. I mean, very similar actually to the other European countries as I looked at the data. Another example is Brazil. I'm getting a little off, but I just want to point out this transformation that we consider started with 9/11 is accelerating, if anything, right now with COVID. And I would point to a report by James Corbett. The Corbett report came out yesterday on the connection, the parallels between 9/11 and COVID-19. His report is called COVID 9/11. And that's available on YouTube, as well as his Corbett, but if you go to YouTube and just search for James Corbett report, you'll get that. The other, I'd like to point to an excellent scientific review of the data, so we get the picture of what's really occurring, and not the scaremongering that is going on, as went on with 9/11, as you know. But with respect to COVID, the data I wanted to point, if you do a search, this scientist's name is Ivor Cummins, which is a little hard to remember, but if you search for viral issue, as in virus, viral issue, that will pull up his report and his excellent analysis of the data worldwide, really, with respect to what's really going on with COVID, just like we talked what really happened on 9/11. Now, because time is short, and I hit something I really wanted to talk about there, so the transformation continues in society. They're calling it the global reset. Surely you've been aware of what's happening with this. They said we'll never get back to where we were before. Well, that's what they said with 9/11, and this transformation accelerates. At this time, I mean, we can do something about it now if we educate ourselves about what's really happening. And so if you'd look up viral issues and get yourself educated, and the Corbett report. So with limited time, I'm just going to give a homework assignment. I do that when I get to a lecture, and we're out of time, students, so I'm going to give you a homework assignment. And here I would point to some recent work I've done the last about 4 years. The first of these was published in Europhysics News. It's an analysis of the collapse of the World Trade Center towers and World Trade Center 7. And this paper was published, fortunately, by Europhysics News. It's had over 1 million reads or views. As I looked at the data yesterday, they keep track of how many people. It's by far the most widely read paper in this prominent journal in Europe, Europhysics News. And if you just go to Europhysics News, one word, and I don't know. Well, anyway, if you look at the most widely read papers, they've got a little blank on that, and click on that, it'll pull our paper up. It's been on the top of that list of the most widely read of the papers in that journal. It's been at the top of that list since it was published, as far as I can tell. I check it periodically. It's always been at the top. And it was published in August of 2016. The next publication is April of this year, and that was the request for correction. This is really an Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. I just so strongly applaud and congratulate the work that Richard and his team that they are doing. And this request for correction sent to NIST. I know NIST has not responded very favorably. I don't think we really expected that they would. But I was happy to contribute my part to that request for correction, and it's available at the AE 9/11 Truth site, where you can also contribute to Jeff Campbell's campaign. And
now, Stephen, your part is huge in this World Trade Center physics news.
That's another very nice publication. That's excellent. When did that come out, Richard? I said that was a few years ago too, as I recall. Excellent.
Yeah, you contributed to both of these greatly.
Right.
And I don't remember the date, but Ted Walter again put this.
Ted Walter, just great work. Yeah.
And so I'm gonna let me know, people. Write me. I'll send you 2 of these for the first 2 people who come.
Great. Get the
info at 911truth.org. These are our infomercials. We got to get them out there. I want to give this stuff away. Go ahead, Stephen.
You're doing great, Richard.
Thank you.
Doing great. The final publication was, I guess, along the lines of David Ray Griffin. These are my own personal experiences, but also my studies. So there's physics in there as well as personal history. This is a book I published just about a year ago now on Amazon. It's a Kindle publication at present. I hope to get that in paper form, but for the present, it's in Kindle format, and those that have Kindle Unlimited, of course, it's free. And you can find this by going to Amazon and typing Stephen Jones 9-11 research, and that'll bring up this book. It's to buy it, it's $2.99. So it's available. That's about as cheap as I could get it. And I just want to again encourage everyone to think about 9/11, but also think about what's happening right now. See if we can make a difference by helping bring forth the facts, the truth of what is really happening, both on 9/11 and with regard to COVID-19, which is really a global transformation, an effort at a global transformation, and not necessarily for the better either. This reset of those lockdowns, the closing of the businesses all over the world, and then the restriction of freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and I just feel like our freedoms are being trampled on. The mandates that are coming out that, well, if you look at Melbourne, Australia, it's just crazy what's happening in the state of Victoria in Australia, other places too. New York, I think, is crazy severe with their lockdowns.
Stephen, how did 9/11 change your life? Waking up to it, I mean.
Oh, wow. Well, of course, I lost my job, at the university.
Sorry
because
about
I was,
that.
yeah.
God.
I was not planned, of course, but I remember talking to David about this. What do I do, David? They put me on administrative leave because of my reports. And one of them was published in a prestigious for the Brigham Young University, which is called the Utah Academy of Arts and Sciences. I published a paper there about thermite and its use on 9/11 in the buildings. That was I gave a presentation along with the paper, and the date on that paper is April of 2006. In September, I was put on administrative leave just before 9/11, 2006. And so, of course, that changed my life dramatically. And I remember asking David, what should I do? There wasn't really much I could do. He suggested accept early retirement if they're offering it, which they did, which kind of surprised me. I didn't know they were going to offer that, but they did. And so I accepted that. And of course, that changed the course of my life dramatically. And I continued to talk about 9/11 and do research. And I'm still, I hope you see, I'm still wanting to participate and help get the truth out.
Yay. Do you have hope for us?
I do.
Oh, yeah.
I do. And we have a large group. Again, the truth involves many aspects, but this transformation of society is not necessarily a good thing that is called for, this new normal, this reset, this new world order is the term we used to use. I think we have to be aware of the ramifications of the truth that we can get out and help it get out, because it works, truth and freedom go together.
Excellent.
Right.
Thank you, Stephen. I'd like to bring in Niels here, Mr. Niels Harrit, primary author of the Active Thermitic Materials in the World Trade Center Dust. Niels, you're a hero to so many people. You have the floor.
Well, I can surely subscribe to everything what David and Stephen has said so far. Eventually, if you need a common denominator for the change that Stephen is referring to, it is fear.
Right.
And because all power is based on fear, and the powers that be, they love terror and they love pandemics because it allows them to, transform society in events that Stephen said is not necessarily to the good. But maybe we should roll back, because you have asked us to make an account for how we got into this, and both Stephen and David preceded me, And I guess that the presentation that Stephen was referring to in Brigham Young was the one which was actually made into a DVD, right, Stephen?
Yes.
So this is the one which was sent to my wife, Pernille Grumme, in the fall of 2006 anonymously. And it was lying around for some time. We didn't know what it was. But the minute I actually put it into the slot of the DVD machine, and I watched on that presentation the collapse of Building 7, it was shocking for two obvious reasons, because as a scientist, I know what gravity is. And to see that building just collapsing, apparently for no reason whatsoever, was shock. And I had to watch it 10 times before it actually sank in. And the other thing, obviously, was, why haven't I heard about anything about this before, like Richard said previously? Because no scientist has ever considered that. And then in the spring of 2007, I actually wrote a paper I wrote an essay for a newspaper here, which by accident actually passed the editor. So it was published and absolutely nothing happened. I guess, and then eventually it was translated into English. It was read by some people. And I believe that it was after the summer of 2007 that I was a referee on a paper that you, Stephen, published together with Kevin in The Environmentalist.
Right. Yes.
Right. And I was referee on that paper. And as you know, what is obvious is that the referee is blind to the authors, but the authors, for very straight reasons, are not blind to the referee. And it happens once in a while. So the referee has the option actually to contact the authors directly. Usually the referee writes a report and say either it's acceptable or is not. But sometimes the referee contact the authors directly if there is something either very interesting, or it's to make the communication shorter. Say, if you change this or that and you resubmit it, it can pass without any comments from my part. But in this case, I got very interested in the situations, and maybe I should make an account for the people who don't know this paper, because it is about the emissions of gases from ground zero in the 3 months which passed after 9/11 until the fires was officially closed down on December the 20th. And it is stunning what is happening, what is coming out in the atmosphere. And I mentioned that one of the chemicals, and it's like eruptions, like volcanoes or geysers on specific days. And some of the chemicals coming up is maybe quite, I would not say common, and they should certainly not be there in this amounts we are talking about here. Benzene, I give me some chemical names here. Benzene, styrene, propylene, eventually toluene, and but there also was a chemical coming out, and forgive me for giving the name of this chemical is 1,3-diphenyl propane, and why that should be there was quietly we don't know yet. It was a big question. So I got into correspondence. I contacted Kevin and Kevin Ryan, and we had a correspondence. I got very interested, and eventually we never reached a conclusion actually where this chemical came from. But all the evidence was there, and on the conclusions, and whatever could be brought as a hypothesis was perfectly okay. So it was printed eventually. But this question remains to this day, and I'm bringing it up. I don't know if this is the proper time to do this, Richard, because it actually connects to the picture you showed about half an hour ago or a little more about the collapse of the Twin Towers. You see the totally canopy of debris being thrown out, and what is the force driving all these steel beams and girders being thrown up and out at the speeds you referred to? What is the driving force? And I believe that it is a nanothermite acting here, not exactly as an explosive, more something in between what you call an explosive or a propellant, because these are one of the virtues, one of the options of nanotechnology, that when you're building the materials from the bottom up, instead of top down, when the old-fashioned thermite, you're mixing iron oxide, you're mixing aluminum and iron oxide, rust powders. This is the top down. But in nanotechnology, you're making the materials from the bottom up, which leaves you with the option to tune the materials and take advantage of the enormous amount of energy being in the thermite reaction. Classical explosives are not particularly energetic. Dynamite or molecular explosives. The key is that they're fast, they're extremely fast, and the conventional thermite is very slow. But enter nanotechnology and you can speed up the reaction because the components get much more. And also you have the option to add, and this is where this chemical comes into. It's embedded in a polymer, and it's a polymer which is providing the gas, and the gas is a condition for moving things in a rocket. Okay, so now you have something in between an explosive and a propellant, and that is what is, in my opinion, giving the thrust to all the material being thrown out of the Twin Towers. And this is what you see. It's in your face. And as Richard pointed out previously, all these pieces are drawing after them a completely homogeneous white smoke trail. What is that? That's aluminum oxide. That's what it is. So, if I may round this up, in order to have a coherent picture of the collapse of the Twin Towers, you need 3 times of energetic materials. Ordinary explosives, I'll return to that. We don't know if they are what we call molecular explosives or if they're thermitic. We don't know that. And then thermate, which was evidenced by Jonathan Barnett of the Worcester Institute of Technology, because he found sulfidation of steel, which is an irrefutable proof of the existence of thermate, because thermate is a military version of the thermite reaction where you add sulfur into it. So it makes a what you call a eutectic mixture with the iron and iron oxide actually. So he discovered iron sulfide within the steel beams he got by accident. It was a slip from NIST, both from Building 7 and from the Twin Towers. And third, you need the nanothermite. And the thermate is used for cutting the columns at the base. And the explosions are all over. One point which I have thought of, I introduced this hypothesis 10 years ago in Toronto. And I've thought to this day, how on earth can they trigger the nanothermite? If you apply it on the inside of the outer panels, of the perimeter panels of the Twin Towers, how can they trigger them? Because as Richard pointed out, the destruction zone is moving, it's accelerating almost at gravitational acceleration. And this is because they have to hide whatever is happening inside. So it has to have close to the same speed as the falling debris in order for us not to be able to see what's going on inside. But if you watch carefully, you can see the explosions all over. So what was the last point here? Yeah. So it's in your face. You need 3 energetic materials to make a coherent model of the collapse of the Twin Towers. And once you see it, it's in your face. There's 1 billion people watching this in real time, and because all the white stuff is aluminum oxide. And I believe that this is what Stephen announced in Boston in, what was it, on December 2007, the key finding there. So you actually have a consistent picture. That's what I suggest. And that is where the chemical from the environmental come in, because the 1,3-diphenyl propane, I believe, is the key to identifying the polymer. We still don't know what the polymer is. That is, we still don't know where the gas comes from. And the gas is a condition for having a thrust to move things. Thermite, the classical thermite cannot move things, but you see things being moved. So you need a force. So you need a gas production of gas. And that's where the 1,3-diphenyl propane comes in, and we still don't know what it is.
That's amazing. I'd never heard that.
Well,
I don't know what it is. Well, would you speculate?
No. Yeah, well, of course. Every hypothesis is speculation. But a scientific paper is a set of data and hypothesis. And you can never submit a paper without actually not trying to come with a hypothesis. It's being rejected flatly. The editor says you have to come with a hypothesis. Well, I suggested this in Toronto, and I also presented this a year ago in Zurich. You were there online, Richard, but that's where I wrapped it up actually and tried to get this together. But it fits, everything fits, and that's a good scientific theory when all the pieces, there's nothing missing here. There's no contradiction if you accept that there are three kinds of energetic material.
Well, Niels, for those who don't know, the EPA found one molecule, and I'm quoting, at levels that dwarfed all others. Now, I don't know what to mean by dwarfed all others, but it's a huge amount. And they said, we've never seen it in any other sampling we've done. And this is World Trade Center dust.
That's the one.
1,3-diphenyl propane.
Yes.
Well, they said, well, maybe it comes from computers, but there's been computers in lots of office fires that they've sampled, and they've never found 1,3-diphenyl propane there. So what the hell is it?
I really looked into different polymers, and eventually polystyrene gives off a little bit of 1,3-diphenyl propane, but we're down to, I believe, 5%. It cannot account. So this, what do you call it? The beakers you use for coffees, and so no, polystyrene cannot account for this.
Okay, Stephen.
There's not enough around, and there's not enough of it in there.
Maybe I can get Stephen to speculate.
Well, what do you think, Steve?
I think we should ask Kevin Ryan what he thinks now, but sounds to me like Niels has pursued this. I remember, of course, this molecule, this strange finding, but we did not have a solution as of our environmentalist paper, which, by the way, was certainly a peer-reviewed, another example of a solid peer-reviewed paper. So no, I don't have a speculation, unless it's in the material that's holding the aluminum. In the red chips, you've got the aluminum, and it could very well be in that red material.
It's a matrix,
as part of the matrix. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And what's a polymer, guys?
Yeah, we don't know what polymer it is. That's the key.
Well, in general, what is a polymer? I actually
plastic.
Oh, okay.
Excuse me. I'm sorry.
It's some form of plastic.
Yeah,
What's so dangerous about plastic?
Depends what you put in it.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's so
dangerous
about plastic, Niels?
Pardon?
What is so dangerous about plastic?
Well, plastic is very useful. Look around.
No, I'm talking about 1,3-diphenyl propane in the World Trade Center dust that shouldn't be there, that the EPA found at levels that dwarfed all others. It's a polymer, you said, right? So
no, 1,3-diphenyl propane is the product of the pyrolysis. Pyrolysis means you destruct something with heat. It's a degradation product of the polymer.
Oh, okay.
So I was looking for a polymer which could produce this substance.
I see.
When it's being heated and destructed by heat. I didn't find it. I couldn't find it. I was thinking, actually, eventually we had to publish, or I have to write to the editor of the environmentalist and said, please, it's perfectly okay, and go ahead and publish it. We never solved it. Kevin was working heavily on it as well, and it remains remains the question to this day. You know, Kevin made nanothermite in his backyard, but the polymer he used there was a perfluoroalkane, which is actually a very good idea because you can make a polymer with Teflon. Did you know that, Stephen?
Yeah.
No,
Yes.
you can make a thermite with aluminum and Teflon. It works.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
and it produces carbon dioxide. So that's why when you see Kevin making the nanothermite in his backyard, he blows off the lid, and that is actually illustration of the effect we're talking about here. In that case, it's carbon dioxide being formed. So that's how you make explosives out of the thermite reaction, is you put it into a polymer which can produce a gas.
Okay, well, this whole discussion's my fault.
Yeah.
I egg you on. For Dr. David Ray Griffin, you were one of the first I know, this viewer says, who openly questioned 9/11. What kind of trouble did you have in your life when you spoke out?
At first, I didn't have any trouble with my school. It happened. We happened to have a president and a dean who was very supportive of my work, but they moved on, and there was a new president who came, and so things didn't go so well from then on. Nobody gave me any trouble, except that when there was a big conference about my work, and they wouldn't publicize it. So I haven't really had what you would call trouble, good trouble or bad trouble.
I'm glad to hear that. And have any? Go ahead. Have any of you ever been threatened in any way? And I'll answer for myself, no. And I find it actually a little disappointing. Disappointing. I haven't even been offered any money to be quiet. I would take that as a compliment. Maybe we're getting somewhere, Stephen.
Well, I was threatened.
Oh.
And I don't talk about it too much. I may have alluded to it in this Amazon book I mentioned about 9/11, but there was a certain fellow, I can mention his name. It's C. Martin something. I won't mention his, well, okay, why not? Hinckley. I mean, he might sue me, but it's I've got his emails. He sent them to the administration. What really got him going, and he threatened my career. He said, I can remember the wording. I think he said, what's at stake here is more important than any one man's career. And he was referring to my career. And later, after I was dismissed from BYU, he said I had to do that. He had contacts with people in the government, and he said I had to do that for the sake of the Bush administration, Bush-Cheney administration. That's basically what he said after I had been dismissed. So he took credit for, and he had written to the administration, and specifically he opposed by talking about thermite. And in fact, it was that talk that I mentioned that was published in Utah Academy of Arts and Sciences, the April 2006 paper. And that got into the Deseret News newspaper in Utah. He read it and he was just livid and wrote to the administration and said, I should not talk about thermite. His excuse was, people might read that. I mean, terrorists could start using thermite. And my response to him is, thermite has been around since it was about 100 years.
1893.
Thank you, Niels. I quoted the date for him at the time. I said, it's no secret. You can buy it on eBay. It's not a secret. Now, nanothermite, that's a different issue. You cannot buy that on eBay. That's a very high tech.
Who makes that stuff, Steve?
That's Los Alamos National Lab. did make it, and they advertised it as something that could be used in demolitions. That was in one of my talks, or at least one of my talks. So yeah, it's a very high-tech material. I mean, who made this quantity? We don't know. That's part of what should be investigated.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's very high-tech material.
Next question is for
Yeah.
David Ray Griffin. But before, go ahead, Niels.
Yeah, about harassment. Actually, my institute leader at the Institute of Chemistry at the University of Copenhagen, I had problems. I mean, he was not very happy about the things I was saying, either at the institute or in the public domain. So he actually told me, he forbid me to talk in the public domain. And so then we had to sit down and say, and it turned out there were rules for that. Actually, and those are the academics was committed to give their affiliation whenever they gave a talk in the public domain, according to the rules. So so he had a problem. So say, well, can't you just don't say you come from the Chemical Institute? And I said, okay. So if you see one of my early presentations, says University of Copenhagen, nothing about the Institute of Chemistry. So I said, so he got off, But then I retired. I retired in 2010, and it was a little, but formally I left by myself. I left my position.
Yeah. I might say they asked me to put on my papers, which I did. This is the sole responsibility of the author, and also I was asked not to talk about Dick Cheney, which at the time, he was the vice. And
I remember.
You remember?
Yeah.
And that's in my book too, about Dick Cheney. He contacted the university, his office did, because he spoke at the university 3 months after I was early retired, January of 2007. He spoke in April, and he was given an honorary doctoral degree for public service. Dick Cheney, if you can imagine, by my university. I was in tears. I mean, it was just absolutely crazy.
Isn't there also a Dick Cheney building at BYU?
No, I don't. Well, I don't think so.
Okay.
But the university did allow protests on campus, 2 protests, and I participated in both of those.
But they let our paper pass.
They let our paper pass. That was the good thing.
Yeah,
that's right. And later they made me an emeritus professor. So there's some good things.
It's a mixed bag. How about you, David? Have you been threatened or coerced or anything like that?
No, I have not. I did want to mention, though, that about Dick Cheney, my book, Dick Bush and Cheney, makes clear that the first term of the Bush-Cheney administration was run by Cheney. Bush was in the basement doing exercises. And so when people talk about Bush as being responsible for 9/11, it was Cheney.
Right.
Okay, well, there's no...
I wanted to apologize.
Your feelings about that. Go ahead.
I want to apologize that while Niels was talking, my computer, or my wife's computer, ran out of juice.
Oh, is that what happened?
To come and give me some more electricity. So I'm very sorry for my disturbance.
No, it worked out. I saved this question for you. Now, we're going over, as people can tell, and I'm perfectly fine with that. This is the most stimulating conversation I've had in 10 years. So one of the other books that David Ray Griffin has written is none other than the excellent Mysterious Collapse of World Trade Center Building 7. And I have gotten so much out of this book. It goes into the lies of the NIST report. it exposes the classic features of controlled demolition, which Building 7 exhibits. And it's from a theologian. It's better than anything I've ever done. David, tell us the story about this book.
Am I still on?
You're still on.
Yes.
Tell us the story about this book. Quickly, this story about this book. Can you hear me? Oh, he's coming and going. He's frozen. Anyway,
It's frozen now.
before he comes back, I want to give you guys 2 copies of this book to 2 of you. It's always the same numbers, 2 and 2. Just email me at info@ae911truth.org. And David, you're back. Tell us the story about this book.
Yeah, thank you, Richard, because when I was giving the list of my favorite books, I forgot to mention that World Trade Center 7, which is the best 9/11 book I wrote. So thank you for lifting it up.
Do this. Yeah. Tell us a quick story about why you decided to write about Building 7.
Well, I had learned from Stephen and Niels and others on that team about it, and David Chandler's great work, and it was just what one would call a slam dunk that the official story is false all the way through. So it's not my most popular book. It's bigger than the others, and it's maybe a little difficult reading, but it is my most important book, I think, about 9/11.
Well, it made AE 9/11 Truth into something that the 9/11 Truth movement can be proud of. I mentioned earlier, we seem to be the tip of the spear of the 9/11 Truth movement and aimed squarely at the Achilles heel of the perpetrators and in their many forms, NIST being chief among them, the media cover-up artists also, and of course government, who's doing nothing to expose the truth about 9/11. Now my question, not mine, but one of our viewers for you, David, how hard was it to find a publisher that was willing to cover a topic like 9/11 Truth? Yeah, that one.
Well, as I tried to say in my introduction, it was very difficult. There was, common courage, which simply said, not for us. Most of the publishers did not even respond to my letter. Even those where Richard Falk had recommended my book. And so it was only because I think, as far as I know, I wouldn't have ever had 9/11, and the New Pearl Harbor published if had not been for Pam Thompson at Interlink Books, whose father had read my other books, my theological books. And so she decided, well, although he's a 9/11, he's a conspiracy theorist, maybe he's okay.
All right. For Niels and Stephen, do you think there's any follow-up work that you could pursue regarding the active thermitic materials paper, or somebody else should pursue?
I'm out of the loop, but I certainly have at least 2 very good experiments which I never got around to doing.
Yeah.
You want to hear?
Yeah.
Well, one thing is talking about the 1,3-diphenyl propane. One thing you could do, Stephen, is simply to put it into a mass spectrometer.
Yeah.
You'll get the answer immediately.
In other words, save the combustion products and analyze for.
Well, in the mass spectrometer, you don't save anything. You have the inlet, and you just heat it up, and it goes bang.
I see. Yeah,
and
that's right.
And you'll get a molecular weight with 10
Yeah. Okay. That's
significant numbers. So you have, if
right.
there's molecular iron, you have it immediately. Otherwise, you have a breakdown pattern from it. So you'll get identification immediately. But I don't have access more, and I only have one chip left, and I keep that as a relic. One good chip left. And the other thing is a nanotube story, which I'm personally very sad that I never got around to doing, because maybe some of you know that story, but there was a report from Mount Sinai Hospital in New York City, where a group of pathologists had investigated lung tissue from the first responders, and they had seven persons involved, and the 4 of them, they found in the lung tissue nanotubes, carbon nanotubes, which is a material is made of carbon atoms, and they are about 1 nanometer in diameter. They're extremely thin and extremely strong, 200 times stronger than spiderweb. And they found these nanotubes in the lung tissue of the first responders. Their control group was building construction workers, and because they have a whole tissue bank, which means they have a control group, huge control group of construction workers, so they could go into them and say, in none of them they found carbon nanotubes. And it came to me in 2010, actually. Yeah, in 10, we were in New York City, and I was together with a guy called Eric Cartolucci, who was a chemist, and we were giving a presentation. You were there, Richard, as well. And that's where the 3 beams came up that evening. Okay, there was a chemist called Eric Cartolucci, and I was just talking with him like a colleague. Now, what are you doing, young man? Yeah, he was working on his PhD on carbon nanotubes, and then it just snapped to me, because nanotubes, they have got the Nobel Prize later on, but at that time it was a very hot material, and in order to make carbon nanotubes, 3 conditions must be fulfilled. You must have a source of carbon atoms, which we have in the polymer in the red gray chips. You need high temperature, which we have in abundance, and you need a catalyst, and iron and nickel are about the best for them. So I said, hey, carbon nanotubes, because at that time I had read the report from the Mount Sinai Hospital. Okay, so I don't remember if it was before or after that Kevin had made his experiments in his back garden, where he had made nanothermite from a recipe from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory I told you about previously, and he had used fluoroalkanes as a polymer. I said, send me some ashes. And he sent me a letter. I have it, it's back of me here. He sent me a letter with the ashes from the combustion of the nanothermite in his garden. The day before I went to Toronto, and I'm showing the pictures. I showed these pictures in Toronto. The day before I went to Toronto, I took the ashes from the nanothermite combustion, and we extracted it with ethanol or propanol. I don't remember. You make an extraction, you dry it. We went to electron microscope, bang, carbon nanotubes there.
Very interesting.
So that makes the link between actually the first responders and the death of them and the nanothermite.
Huh.
And unfortunately, and I'm telling you about one of the regrets in my life. The problem is here that the reaction in itself is brand new, Stephen, because the way you make carbon nanotubes is you per pyrolysis from the gas phase directly on the hot catalyst. It has never been made in a solid state reaction before. So I thought this was made into nature nano letters. And for that reason, I never got that paper written. Very sadly. I regret that, and I hope maybe what I'm saying here will make somebody else picking up this torch. But I think this will really, it could bring the this is first responders, and this very rare, I don't know what you call it in English, this very kind of lung tissue cancer they're suffering. Carbon nanotubes are really damaging to the health. It's really an issue environment because it's very difficult to get rid of. And they are so small, in my hypothesis, they interfere with the cell membranes. That's why it's a health issue. And the fact that it was found in more than half of the lung tissue from the first responders. This is from April. It was right before. It's from April 2010, I think. That report from Mount Sinai Hospital. It was right before. Remember, we was at that meeting in New York, Richard, where the free steel beams came up. That's right before that.
Yeah,
that's the two regrets I have, or the two experiments which remains to be done.
Niels, you're still a relatively young man compared with me. I think you're the one to do it.
I'm 75.
No,
but I don't have access. Yeah.
I'm younger than that, but
yeah.
I don't
actually,
have,
Richard calling you, Stephen.
A little bit.
Have access. I don't have access. I mean,
that's the
I'm
thing. That's
persona
the thing.
non grata at the university.
Yeah, I lost my after the publication of the 2009 paper, which Niels was the first author. I lost my lab privileges. Where I was doing electron microscopy work and EDX, down there. And as an underground laboratory, I lost my lab privileges. So, but let me say, Richard, about that, you've presented, we have overwhelming evidence between David's books and the papers that Niels and I and Kevin and others have written and your talks. I mean, we have and the latest by Hulsey and, the gentleman at Alaska. University of Alaska. We have overwhelming evidence. Ted Walter has done a great job. So I'm right now, as I mentioned, I'm concerned about this. We're embedded in another transformative event, a big lie, and I'd like to see it exposed, and I'd like to see the truth bringing forth freedom, getting us back our freedom of assembly, for instance, freedom of speech, and so on. I'm concerned that this transformation will not be to our liking. A mandatory vaccination would be devastating, I think, for example, just one example.
Yeah, thank you, Steve.
So I really think that we can do something, taking what we've learned from 9/11 and applying it in our current situation.
Yeah, it sounds like another catalyzing and catastrophic event.
Right.
Pearl Harbor, maybe.
Richard,
David, let's talk. Go ahead, David, and I have another question for you.
If there is time, I'd like to build on what Neil was saying
go right
about the first responders.
Yeah.
I recently wrote an article about it that was published in a new magazine called Garrison. And a great new magazine, by the way. And I argued in there that the cancer, particularly from the first responders, by itself proves that the buildings were brought down with explosives.
Interesting.
So really, that's all you need.
Tell people where they can find that.
I don't know. It's just called Garrison, with a low G, without a capital G.
Garrison.com.
I think it's just called Garrison.
Okay.
It's something that you get through the mail. It's not online.
Well, would you send me I mean, that's huge. Cancer. The proof is of the demolition of the towers is the cancer in these and those who didn't survive and those who are
again.
Yeah. Noam Chomsky. What hope do we have of reaching him, and what is his problem?
Oh, it's a very long story. Peter Dale.
We froze David. While he's coming back, let me say that I went into Noam Chomsky's office with one of our volunteers. And hold on a second, David. I'm just prefacing your comments about Chomsky. We went into his office, and he said, "We need peer-reviewed papers from you guys." You know, we'd been peppering him for years. Here we had a binder with 75 peer-reviewed papers. We just dumped it on him. We took a picture. It's available somewhere on our old website. David, go ahead. What's the long story in the short version of Chomsky?
Well, Hughdale Scott said that he had been good friends with Chomsky, but then they broke over the Kennedy assassination. That Chomsky argued that the idea that was an inside job is just not possible. And so he says the same thing about 9/11. And so I've written to him many times about it, and other people have, and nothing's going to happen. You might as well just give up on Chomsky.
He's getting old too.
Yeah, him too. Huh?
He's even older than I am. But
well, guys, who's out there that we can break through to that's almost half cracked or worth approaching?
Well, he and Richard Falk are good friends, and Chomsky, in fact, came and stayed with Richard for a few days last year. But Richard is not going to get into trying to convince him about 9/11. You know, they worked together on Vietnam. Mm-hmm. And so he's done so many great things that I don't like to criticize him too heavily.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, for Niels and Stephen, does it ever frustrate you how huge the findings of your nanothermite paper are and how academia tries to ignore it?
Steve?
Well, yeah, it is frustrating, Richard. And, you know, we face this problem when we're presenting these data because I guess it's because as I talk to people, they say, well, the political implications, that is the societal implications are so great. Plus, how is it possible that so many people can be deceived by, I mean, we all know the narrative. Everybody knows the narrative. It was 19 Muslim hijackers. I mean, that's it. There was no foreknowledge on the behalf of the government. Everybody knows the narrative. I mean, you're challenging the narrative. And so somehow, actually, I think that the COVID, this pandemic has become such almost an obvious distortion of the truth. I think a lot of people are saying, wait a minute, you know, it's, you look at the projections of deaths, you look at the actual deaths, I mean, they do not correspond. And why do we have lockdowns and masks? And people are actually protesting, I notice, in Germany and
France, Britain,
France,
all
and elsewhere. Yeah. And
well,
so,
go ahead.
You know, the point is, as the people say, wait a minute, the government lies to us, and they impose all these restrictions on our liberties. Maybe we should rethink about 9/11 as well. You see, there's an opening there. It works both ways. If you awaken to the big lie today, then you say, well, wait a minute, where did this transformation effort begin, which was really the new Pearl Harbor of 9/11. And it's just a continuation and acceleration of that transformation they're trying to pull on us.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking about the psychology of this whole thing, this viewer says, do you think the inability of for people to psychologically process the official explanation of 9/11, that is not true, it plays a role in some people not being responsive to our point of view? I mean, what are the blocks out there that we have to break open, and how do we break them open, Niels?
Well, maybe David also would comment on that, because I think that is due to the tribe, which is the most important unit in society. It overrules the family, actually, and the tribe is, I believe, is actually in genetics, because if Homo sapiens was not ready to submit to the tribe, he wouldn't survive. So was it the old days, simply. So you're used. It is in Homo sapiens, our nature, to have a leader and to trust him and to give him or her responsibility for us. And if the leader fails, or is obviously a tyrant to be responsive, or even parents, it hurts. It simply hurts you. It's painful to realize that the person that we have given responsibility for our security fails us, betrays us. It hurts. So it's very simple. You move back from that thought because it hurts, and you goes along with the other sheep in the tribe. Yeah. That's one reason. There are several other things which, because as Stephen and I, to a lesser extent, have experienced is social exclusion, which is faint compared to what happened back in the Middle Ages, where the conspiracy theories of the day, called heretics, were simply put on the fire and burned. 50,000. Right. It almost happened to Galileo. He just escaped by torture, saying the Earth is standing still in the middle of the universe. So he escaped the fire, the bonfire.
Yeah.
Pardon? We are heretics. We are heretics of our time. We are telling the truth, and we are thinking the thoughts, the forbidden thoughts.
That's right.
In 1619, the Catholic Church forbid people to think that the Earth was moving around the sun, and that was the basic for pulling Galileo for the Inquisition in 1633.
David, what are we facing here psychologically?
I'm not a physical scientist. I'm also not a psychological scientist, so I wouldn't try to speak to this.
You're a theologian.
But you did write a book on nationalistic faith. Can you address that part of it?
Well, that's true. I wrote a book on 9/11 and a theological book using 9/11, and that ended up the president and the vice president of the publishing house that accepted my manuscript got fired.
Wow.
And so the press disowned my book. So now I have one fewer publisher now to deal with.
But we're challenging people's faith in Americanism. You touched on that quite a bit. Tell us about that.
Well, that was the issue. The head of this organization that fired those people, fired those guys, and denounced my book, said that the Presbyterian organization, and they're usually pretty big. You might remember about Calvin. Well, I've written a lot of books about Calvin and denounced him up and down, and I've never had any criticism by them about my criticism of Calvin. But theology is one thing, Americanism is another thing, and they could not accept that my criticism of America as perfect. So that's the situation there.
So it's embedded in all of us, this pristine faith we have that America, right or wrong, and always right, just kind of can't be questioned.
That's right.
Well,
and, when I first started on 9/11, I took time off from a book I was writing on the American Empire. And I thought, well, I'm just going to write up this little lecture that I had given to my students. I'll write this up as a little book, and then I'll be able to get back to my book on the empire. And of course, 12 books later, many years later, just this year, I finally got out that book on the American Empire. It's called the American Trajectory. And that's the issue is about American exceptionalism.
That's the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Steve,
We are exceptional, but not in necessarily a good way.
Okay.
Well, both.
What are we facing here psychologically, Stephen?
Oh, wow.
And this will be our last response. We're going to have to move on to our surprise guest coming up here. So go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, you know, again, I have to draw this parallel with COVID because we're all embedded in that, I think. And we are. And we see, I mean, if you tried to write down what is the narrative, it seems to be morphing a bit, but basically the narrative has been that, and it's the same thing we face with 9/11. There's this great danger, as Niels pointed out, we have to fear this terrible threat. It was Muslim hijackers, and they're in Iraq and Afghanistan. You know, we have to go to war and so on. Now the threat is this invisible virus, but it's going to overwhelm our hospitals. There is no cure. They're adamant about that. You have to take this vaccine. We've heard this pronouncement, and you have to stay locked down in your house, isolated. Isolate yourself socially. It's unprecedented. This fear. Fear is not unprecedented as a means of controlling populations and exerting a transformation, but the opportunity to wake up and people saying, wait a minute, it's not closing down the hospitals. It's not killing people by the millions. What are we doing? Why are we locking down? Why are we isolating ourselves from each other? I think people are starting to wake up, and that's a psychological thing. And I just think it's great that there is this opportunity to be involved in helping people wake up.
Okay, Niels, you have the last word here tonight.
Oh, and I'm just saying, absolutely in what Stephen said, please notice the link between 9/11 and the COVID-19, but now we have become the terrorists. It's we who are contagious.
That's
so
right.
it's actually, but I'm not ill. Yes, you are, because you have taken this RT-PCR test and it's positive, but I'm not sick. Yes, you are. You are the terrorists. So go in quarantine. That is deep.
That is. Yeah.
So and
It's-
maybe
it's
and
warfare.
that's the extinction of the terror. The war on terror has morphed into the war, well, on us.
Yeah.
We
Oh,
are we are the terrorists now.
That's right.
Now that is deep, but
And our
still,
freedom.
still not. Yeah, and yeah. And
Yeah, it's
still,
always freedom.
9/11 is key, and maybe I should leave the last word either to you, Richard, or to David, because 9/11 is key still, because that's where we have been. World War III started 19 years ago, and the children coming out of schools have never, at least in Denmark, it's different in America, but in Denmark, the kids coming out of the school now has never experienced our country in peace, and it makes me angry and sad. So World War III started 19 years ago, and 9/11 was the start of it all. And COVID-19 is complete, as Stephen has pointed out so brilliantly, extinction of 9/11.
Yeah. So
It has morphed 9/11 has morphed into COVID-19.
Right.
And it's just as a false flag as anyone can be. Yeah.
Let's agree then that freedom is what's under attack in every case. So
Right.
getting the word out about 9/11 will wake up those who are questioning the current situation. So we'll work harder and harder, and you guys set the stage for us. Again, we can't tell you how grateful we are from the bottom of our hearts and the entire 9/11 Truth Movement. Niels Harrit, David Ray Griffin, Stephen Jones, we love you, and we hope you continue working in your retirement for 9/11 Truth, and certainly, at least in your prayers. Our hearts go with you, and we hope to meet again, and that this is not the last time we talk with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye. It's good
Thank
to see
you,
you all.
guys.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
We love you. All right, and David, we have to let you go too. Bye, David. Oops. And guess what, guys? That brings us to almost the close of day 2 of Justice Rising, where we have had an incredible array of speakers, including Dylan Avery, Kelly David, Leroy Hulsey. My God, it seemed like quite a day. We had Matt Campbell. Excuse me, that was yesterday. We'll talk about yesterday in a moment. But we had Roland Angle tell us about the Building 7 study. And of course, the 3 pioneers in the 9/11 Truth Movement, David Ray Griffin, Stephen Jones, Niels Harrit. I mean, what do we possibly do to share with you at the end of this second day of Justice Rising, Science Saturday? We're going to go right to a whole new paradigm. And nobody's more apt to change our paradigm than the inimitable and ever-present Mr. Benny Wills. We're going to bring him in here. Benny, how are you?
I'm good, Richard. Wow, what an introduction. I appreciate that.
We're so grateful to have you. What you heard? You were there with David Ray Griffin, Stephen Jones, Niels Harrit. Just off the cuff, Benny, you've been to so many truth conferences. What do you do inside of your soul when you hear this information and this perspectives from these pioneers in the 9/11 Truth Movement?
Well, it's inspiring and encouraging, and just it always serves as a reminder that there are so many people from all walks of life who see through the nonsense and can decipher the lies. And there's no stereotype for a freedom fighter or a truth seeker. It's anybody from anywhere. And I'm just honored to be in the same company as guys like you just had on.
Isn't it incredible? I mean, yeah, it's amazing. You have a poem to share with us, Benny, to help us kind of grok this?
I do, yeah. And I had something in mind, but based off of what you guys were talking about, I decided to change it up. So,
all right,
I'll keep it simple, just like last night. And goes like this. They are ruthless. They are heartless. They don't care about our health. They are greedy. They are seedy. They rob us of our wealth. They deceive us. They mistreat us. They numb us with TV. They mislead us. They disease us. They say obedience is key. They put poison in the water. They put poison in the air. They put poison in the food supply. Then they tell us that they care. They engage in endless war. They send our sons away to die. They send our daughters away as well now under equality's disguise. They peddle pills to millions. They push debts into the trillions. They scare us. They impair us while they carpet bomb civilians. They teach us life is meaningless. They tell us all is random. They say have faith in scientists and authority in tandem. They are ubiquitous. They seem omnipresent. They control the past from perches present. They plot and plan and scheme in secret. Exploitation, their great achievement. The puppeteering invisible all-seers, the profiteering racketeers of fear, the cult of death to which mankind adheres, they are behind it. But who is they? Satan?
Uh-oh. Looks like we lost
News?
There you go.
Freemasons, Disney, Jesuits, the Vatican, NASA, Netflix, the Jews, bankers, aliens, the Clintons, the Queen, the Rothschilds, Henry Kissinger, Crown Council of 13. It doesn't really matter. Because the solution to they is we. Us and you and me. They are pathological. They are pitiful. They are diabolical. They are miserable. They are wicked beings living wickedly. And their punishment is their wickedness. That's all I got for you. .com/BennyWills, BennyWills.com. I'm Benny Wills.
Yeah, you filled us up, dude. We're so grateful that just like be pulled out.
This is my contribution, and I'm happy to be that guy.
Yeah, we need that guy. I mean, it cuts right through the blocks that we all get into as a result of our seemingly ineffective pushing this huge rock up this big hill, and then you come and you just smash the rock.
Well, I appreciate that. It's a huge compliment coming from you, and if it can reach anybody, even one person, then I've contributed something of value.
Yeah, and Benny, you've got many other poems. What's your YouTube channel people can watch?
Sure. YouTube.com/Benny Wills, BENNYWILLS. Go to my website, bennywills.com. Email me, benny@bennywills.com. I'm very accessible. You can type my name in and you'll see my face pop up and all my social media stuff pop up. So very accessible.
Pretty cool. Thank you, Benny. You're going to be back with us tomorrow night too, aren't you?
I'll give you one more tomorrow.
Thank you so much. And we'll see you then. And thanks so much.
Thanks, Richard.
I did that backwards, guys. Let's do that and that. And this brings us to the close of day 2 of Justice Rising, 9/11 in 2020. Thank you guys so much for being with us. It is just awesome to bring these speakers to you. Oh, wait, hold on. Some of you are saying, hey, I get it now. I've seen the evidence. I want to do something. Guess what? Put this bumper sticker on your car. I'll give you 4 of them. 2 of them to 2 of you. 4 altogether. Rethink 9/11. The evidence might surprise you. Yeah, there's things you can do on your own. Go to our website, AE 9/11 Truth, after getting informed. Whoops. We want you to make an appointment with your congressman. We'll come and we'll do the presentation. We've been begging people to do this. So that's one of the things you can do. Of course, we want you to donate now. We're probably up to about 90,000 of the 100,000 campaign goal for the legal expenses required for the new inquest by Jeff Campbell by Matt Campbell into his brother Jeff's murder. And the World Trade Center evidence that you've seen tonight from all of our speakers is being used for that purpose. It's being packaged. And this is a tailor-made opportunity to get the evidence into the international court system, this court system internationally, and support the other initiatives that we have at AE 9/11 Truth. Want to thank everybody, all of our speakers, our staff. We work so hard to try to pull this together. It's our first online conference. You can see that it's not perfected yet, but the content is there and it's affecting all of us deeply. I don't even know how I'm going to sleep tonight hearing everything I've heard. It's a lot to process. I'll let you go and do that. Thanks, everybody, so much. And we'll see you tomorrow. When? Tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern, Sunday, tomorrow. False Flags and Wars of Terror. Daniela Ganser from Switzerland, an incredible speaker, an expert on those subjects. John Whitehead from the Rutherford Institute, 9/11 and the Advancing Police State. Yeah, he's a constitutional attorney and international speaker. And followed by James Corbett. The Alexandria Library is on fire. Internet censorship from 9/11 to today. James Corbett does it. It's YouTube right now. This is the current Library of Alexandria that they're burning down. And this very platform that we're on right now, its days are numbered. We can be pulled off. There's like almost nothing you can do about it except duplicate our efforts on other platforms, which we're all about. Anyway, all of that tomorrow. Join us. We'll see you then.